All right, the meeting will come to order. Good morning. Welcome to the National Transportation Safety Board. I'm Jennifer Homendy, and I'm honored to serve as chair of the NTSB. With me today are my board colleagues, Member Michael Graham, Member Tom Chapman, and our two new board members, Member Alvin Brown and Member Todd Inman. A special welcome to you both, and because they work so hard, and I was a staffer on Capitol Hill once, and this is the first meeting of this full board, I want to do a special welcome to board member staff. So behind us, we have Michelle Barth, who is Special Assistant to Member Brown, and Member Brown's confidential assistant there you are, Braxton Coleman. We have Michael Hampton, Special Assistant to Member Graham, and his confidential assistant, is also in the audience. We have Stephen Stadius, my Special Assistant, and Kelly Hessler, my Deputy Chief of Staff, is in the back in the audience. We have Linda McGonigal, Member Chapman's confidential assistant, and soon I will share as my confidential assistant. Ivan Chung, Member Chapman's special, is on leave. And then we have Joe Sedor, who's Special Assistant on detail to Member Inman. Olivia Marcus, his confidential assistant, is in the audience. So thank you for all the work you do as well. Today's meeting is open to the public in accordance with the Government and the Sunshine Act. We're here today to discuss the final investigation report of the runway incursion and overflight involving Southwest Airlines Flight 708 and FedEx Flight 1432 that occurred on February 4th, 2023 at Austin-Bergstrom International Airport in Austin, Texas. The NTSB investigative team will walk us through the event in detail shortly, but first, this incident could have been catastrophic if not for the heroic actions of the FedEx crew. I'm delighted First Officer Rob Bradeen was able to accept my invitation to join us today. Captain Carvajal had a conflict and sends his regrets. I was honored to meet Rob last August and fly back to D.C. with him after visiting him and FedEx executives in Memphis, and he is joined today by his colleagues at FedEx and also the Airline Pilots Association. So Rob, please stand. Great job. Thank you. I do believe that the excellent communications between you and Captain Carvajal, two qualified crew members in the cockpit and air traffic control at the time, really saved the lives of 131 people in total. So thank you. It was heroic, and we'll talk more about it in the board meeting today, but thank you for all your work. But this wasn't the only incident that we're investigating. The NTSB is currently investigating 9 other runway incursions, 2 runway excursions, and 1 runway collision. We recently published final investigation reports on 2 wrong surface landings, 1 in Tulsa and 1 in Pittsburgh, as well as close calls in Boston and at JFK. And we're currently collecting information on a few more that occurred just this last week. We released an abstract of the final JFK report just yesterday, so let me say a few words about that event. It endangered the lives of 308 people on 2 separate aircraft. Without a doubt, surface surveillance technology played a huge role in backing up the controller who reacted promptly to the alerts. The NTSB first recommended surface detection equipment for air traffic personnel in 1991. But our support of technology to promote surface safety goes back much, much earlier. In fact, we've been issuing recommendations to prevent runway incursions using technology since 1973. As you'll hear later in staff presentations, Austin did not have any such technology at the time of the incident. Whenever we talk about close calls and near misses, I can't help but recall one other serious incident, one that happens to be the first investigation report that I deliberated and voted on as a board member. On July 7th, 2017, Air Canada Flight 759 was cleared to land on runway 28 right at San Francisco International Airport, but instead lined up on a parallel taxiway where 4 airplanes, which combined were carrying about 1,000 people, were awaiting takeoff clearance. The flight Crew initiated a go-around and reached a minimum altitude of about 60 feet, overflying the 4 airplanes on the taxiway before starting the climb. Alarming as they are, events like these are rare. Commercial aviation is by far our safest mode of transportation. But the somber truth is it only takes one. One missed warning, one incorrect response, even one missed opportunity to install life-saving technology can lead to tragedy, shatter our stellar safety record, and destroy public confidence in our aviation system. According to the FAA, there were 23 Category A and B runway incursions in 2023, up from 16 in 2022. Already in 2024, there have been 7. That probably doesn't include the 2 that we're looking into that occurred just recently. The FAA classifies runway incursions into 5 categories, categories A through E, with A and B being the most serious. Category A is reserved for incidents in which a collision was narrowly avoided. Category B incursions are when separation decreases and there is a significant potential for collision, which may result in a time-critical corrective or evasive response to avoid a collision. Austin was a Category A incident, the most serious of all incursions. Indeed, the airplanes came within 150 to 170 feet of each other at their closest point. Now, some may say that the increase in runway incursions is due to the increase in air traffic over the years. For FY 2023, there were approximately 54.3 million takeoffs and landings in the national airspace system, and a total of 1,760 runway incursions. The number of runway incursions does fluctuate year to year, which is why it's also essential to look at the rate at which these events occur. At the end of FY 23, the rate of Category A and B incursions per 1 million airport operations was at its highest level in over a decade. Bottom line, we're trending in the wrong direction. At the NTSB, our mission goes beyond investigating when something goes wrong. To make our skies safer, to preserve our gold standard for aviation safety, we know we have to be proactive. It's why we investigate not just aviation accidents, but also incidents, because we know all too well that the absence of a fatality or accident doesn't mean the presence of safety. The absence of a fatality or an accident doesn't mean the presence of safety. We exist to ensure the presence of safety. That's why we're here. Our goal is not to place blame. We want to learn from this incident so it never happens again. Not in Austin, not in Kansas City, not in Anchorage, not anywhere. At the NTSB, we work under what we call the party system, meaning we bring together technical experts from those involved in the incident to help us gather and develop the facts around an investigation. Parties don't participate in the analysis or development of the findings, probable cause, or safety recommendations, but they are critical to helping us obtain information that we need for our investigations. At the same time, parties get access to information over the course of our investigation in real time so they can make immediate safety change. I'd like to thank the following organizations for their collaboration with us on scene and their role as parties to the investigation: the Federal Aviation Administration, Southwest Airlines, Federal Express Corporation, the Southwest Airlines Pilots Association, the Airline Pilots Association International, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, the Boeing Company, and Honeywell Aerospace Technologies. Thank you all. Now, turning back to the report, each board member has studied the draft report and met individually with the investigative team. But this is the first time we've gathered as a board to discuss the report. In a moment, NTSB staff will present the pertinent facts and analysis and summarize their findings in detail. After their presentations, board members will question staff on the key safety issues uncovered during the investigation. These include communications between pilots and controllers, aircraft surface detection equipment and flight technology, training on the surface movement, guidance and control system plan and low visibility operations, and the need for 25-hour cockpit voice recorders. Staff will then propose the relevant findings, probable cause, and safety recommendations for board consideration. Following the incorporation of any amendments voted on today, the final report will be available on the website in a few weeks. This allows staff to make final edits. However, an abstract will be available immediately. The public docket for this investigation was released on November 9th, 2023, and contains more than 3,500 pages of additional relevant material. It's available on our website at ntsb.gov. I'll now ask Deputy Managing Director for Investigations, Brian Curtis, to introduce members of the NTSB team participating in today's meeting. We'll then go right into staff presentations. Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair and the entire board, and good morning to those in the audience, and welcome to the NTSB boardroom. A couple of announcements before we begin. I kindly request, if you've not already done so, please silence your mobile phones and other electronic devices. And one other important item, in the event of an emergency, there are 2 exits in front of the auditorium, one to my left and one to my right, to the audience's right, rather. Go down the stairs, out the door, and follow the illuminated exit signs to depart the facility. You may also exit to the rear of the auditorium and proceed out the glass doors you entered, go up the stairs, and exit straight ahead through the large glass doors to the outside. Once you've exited, turn left and follow the sidewalk to the end of the street. Please proceed quickly and follow the instructions of NTSB staff. Do not return to the boardroom until instructed or advised to do so. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact NTSB staff. Thank you. I'll now introduce staff for today's meeting. On the front row to my right, Mr. Tim LeBaron, Director for the Office of Aviation Safety, Mike Hauf, Investigator in Charge, Brian Soper, Air Traffic Control, Dr. Dujuan Sevillian, Human Performance, and Carl Garner, Flight Data Recorders. The second row behind me, left to right, Jennifer Adler, Director for the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications, Monica Aquino-Tiemann, Acting Deputy General Counsel for the NTSB, Barbara Check, Director for the Office of Research and Engineering, Karen Stein, Report Writer, Captain Warren Abrams, Operations, and Nathan Hoyt, Safety Recommendations Specialist. And in the third row, left to right, Casey Ogden, Visuals and Timer, Don Ike, Meteorology, Dr. Taran Kayagil, Medical, Marie Moeller, Aircraft Performance, and Adam Hooray, Systems. The presentations will begin with an investigation overview by the investigator in charge, Mike Hauf. Mr. Hauf.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Hamady and members of the board. I will give a brief overview of the incident investigation, and then the group chairs will follow with presentations in their specific areas. On February 4th, 2023, about 6:40 Central Standard Time, Southwest Airlines Flight 708, a Boeing 737-700, and Federal Express Flight 1432, a Boeing 767-300, were involved in a runway incursion at Austin-Bergstrom International Airport, Austin, Texas. Southwest Flight 708 was a scheduled international passenger flight operating under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 121, from Austin to Cancun International Airport, Cancun, Mexico, with 128 occupants on board. FedEx Flight 1432 was a domestic cargo flight operating under Part 121 from Memphis International Airport, Memphis, Tennessee, to Austin, with 3 occupants on board. Night instrument meteorological conditions prevailed at the time. The flight crew of the FedEx airplane, which was arriving on runway 18 left, executed a missed approach as the Southwest airplane was departing from the same runway. A runway collision was avoided. The occupants aboard both airplanes were not injured, and neither airplane sustained damage. The airplanes were separated at their closest point by 150 to 170 feet. Federal Aviation Administration procedures required the controller to apply a prescribed same runway separation between the Southwest and FedEx airplanes. Because of the weather conditions, the controller was unable to see the Southwest airplane on the taxiway. Low instrument flight rule conditions were occurring at Austin before and during the incident. The controller received weather briefings before the start of his shift and was aware that low visibility conditions existed at the airport. At the time of the incident, visibility was a quarter mile in dense freezing fog. Vertical visibility was 200 feet above ground level. The Southwest flight crew requested takeoff clearance, and the controller provided the takeoff clearance. However, because of the decreased visibility, the controller was unaware that the Southwest airplane was 550 feet away from the hold short line. The Austin Control Tower did not have surface detection equipment such as ASDX, which stands for Airport Surface Detection Equipment Model X, or ASSC, which stands for Airport Surface Surveillance Capability. Both of these systems enable controllers to see aircraft and other vehicles on the airport surface and during approach and departure. The fog and the lack of surface detection equipment impeded the controller from adequately monitoring ground traffic on the morning of the incident. Because the controller did not use position reporting, which Dr. Sevillian will discuss shortly, the controller was unaware of the Southwest airplane's position on the taxiway and on the runway. When Southwest lined up with the runway centerline and came to a complete stop to perform a required engine run-up, the separation between the two airplanes was less than 2 miles, and FedEx was 33 seconds from the runway threshold. The separation between the two airplanes continued to decrease until the FedEx flight crew saw the outline of the Southwest airplane through the fog and called for the perform go-around. At that time, FedEx had just crossed the runway threshold, and Southwest was about 1,000 feet down the runway. The Southwest airplane lifted off, and FedEx made a second approach to the runway and landed without further incident. An animation of the incident was created using information from automatic dependent surveillance broadcast data and air traffic control recordings. At this time, if you do not wish to view the animation, you may exit the boardroom, and those watching by webcast may wish to temporarily turn away from the display. The animation will run for about 9 minutes. Please play the animation. On February 4th, 2023, about 6:40 a.m. Central Standard Time, Southwest Airlines Flight 708 and Federal Express Flight 1432 were involved in a runway incursion at Austin-Bergstrom International Airport in Austin, Texas. Southwest Airlines Flight 708, a Boeing 737-700, was departing from runway 18 left en route to Cancun, Mexico, with 123 passengers, 2 flight crew, and 3 cabin crew. FedEx Flight 1432, a Boeing 767-300, was a cargo flight arriving on runway 18 left from Memphis, Tennessee, with 2 crew and 1 off-duty FedEx pilot. 10 airplanes had taken off that morning before Southwest 708, but FedEx 1432 was the first arrival of the day. Arrivals and departures were cleared by a local controller in the tower. The tower is about 3,700 feet from the north end of runway 18 left. Night conditions prevailed and dense fog obscured the view of the airport surface, so the controllers could not see the airplanes on the taxiways or runways. Also, the airport does not have surface detection equipment that could show the positions of airplanes on the taxiways or runways on a display. At 6:34:02, the FedEx crew called to report they were established on a Category 3 instrument landing system approach for runway 18 left. This meant that the autopilot was flying the precision approach while the crew monitored. The controller reported runway visibility to the FedEx crew and cleared the airplane to land. The following animation will be played twice. The air traffic control audio and a transcript will be included the second time. The animation does not depict the lighting or weather conditions. As a reminder, the weather prevented the controller from seeing the airplanes and limited the ability of the FedEx crew to see the Southwest airplane. The animation begins with Southwest 708 on taxiway Bravo proceeding to runway 18 left. FedEx 1432 is on approach, but not yet clearly visible in the animation. Its position is indicated by the circle. At the bottom of the animation, the local time, separation of the two airplanes, and altitude above ground level of the FedEx airplane are displayed. Nearly 5 minutes after the FedEx airplane was cleared to land, Southwest 708 reported they were short of runway 18 left and ready to depart. At that time, Southwest 708 was 550 feet from the whole short line, which is 200 feet from the edge of the runway. The controller cleared the Southwest airplane for takeoff and advised that a Boeing 767 was on a 3-mile final approach. The FedEx flight crew asked the controller to confirm they were cleared to land. The controller confirmed they were cleared to land and that a Boeing 737 was departing ahead of them. About that time, the FedEx airplane descended below 800 feet above ground level, meaning they were no longer visible on the controller's display. At 6:39:44, FedEx 1432 was within 2 miles of the runway threshold. Controllers are required to separate aircraft by a minimum of 2 miles. Southwest 708 turned onto the runway and stopped to perform an engine run-up, which is required when the engine anti-ice is used for takeoff. Southwest was stopped for 19 seconds before beginning its takeoff roll. The controller asked Southwest to confirm they were moving. The Southwest crew reported they were rolling and the airplane began to move. At 6:40:34, the FedEx crew reported they were going around. At that time, FedEx 1432 was already beginning to climb. The animation will be played again with the air traffic control audio and its transcript. As a reminder, the weather prevented the controller from seeing the airplanes and limited the ability of the FedEx crew to see the Southwest airplane.
Austin Tower, FedEx 1432 Heavy, passing 5.4. For that, Cat 3 ILS, 18 left.
FedEx 1432 Heavy, Austin Tower, 18 left, RBR, touchdown 1,400, midpoint 600, rollout 1,800, 18 left to the land.
Set to land, 18 left, FedEx 1432 Heavy. Tower, Southwest 708, we're short of 18 left, we're ready.
Southwest 708 Austin Tower, runway 18 left, RBR 1,200, midpoint 600, rollout 1,600. Landing 170, runway 18 left, clear for takeoff, traffic 3-mile final is a Heavy 767.
Okay, 170, clear for takeoff, 18 left, copy the traffic, Southwest 708. Tower, confirm, FedEx 1432 Heavy, clear to land on the 18 left.
FedEx 1432 Heavy, that is affirmative, 18 left, you are clear to land, traffic departing class, route 737.
Roger.
Southwest 70, confirm on the road.
Rolling now. Southwest aboard. FedEx is on the go.
Southwest 708, roger, you can turn right when able.
Negative.
Southwest 708 continued its scheduled flight to Cancun, and FedEx 1432 returned and landed at 7:05. None of the occupants on either airplane were injured. Afterward, the FedEx crew reported seeing the lights and silhouette of Southwest 708 through the dense fog and calling for a missed approach. The timing of the missed approach call is unknown because the cockpit voice recorders on both airplanes were overwritten. But the engines were advanced just after the FedEx airplane crossed the runway threshold. At their closest point, the belly of FedEx 1432 was less than 200 feet from the tail of Southwest 708. The investigation established that the following factors did not cause or contribute to the incident: flight crew and controller qualifications, flight crew and controller fatigue, and tower staffing. As a result of our investigation, several safety issues were identified which fall into the following 4 discussion areas: communication between pilots and controllers, airport surface detection equipment and flight deck technology, training on surface movement guidance and control system plan and low visibility operations, and the need for 25-hour cockpit voice recorders. I would like to acknowledge staff who participated in this investigation. Parties to the investigation were the Federal Aviation Administration, Southwest Airlines, Federal Express Corporation, the Boeing Company, Southwest Airlines Pilots Association, Airline Pilots Association International, National Air Traffic Controllers Association, and Honeywell Aerospace Technologies. This concludes my presentation. Next, Mr. Soper will give his presentation on air traffic control issues found during this investigation. He will be followed by Dr. Sevillian, who will present on human performance issues, and Mr. Garner, who will present the issues we found with the currently mandated 2-hour cockpit voice recorder duration.
Thank you, Mr. Hauf. I will speak briefly about air traffic control issues. Specifically, my presentation will discuss control tower background information, surface detection equipment, the Austin Surface Movement Guidance and Control System Plan, or as you will hear it referred to throughout this presentation, SMIGS, and low visibility training. There were 2 controllers in the tower at the time of the incident. One controller was working both local control positions combined to the local east workstation and was providing services to the Southwest and FedEx flights at the time of the incident. The other controller was working the ground control and clearance delivery positions combined to the ground control workstation while also providing general oversight as the operations supervisor. It was the local controller who was responsible to ensure that applicable same runway separation was maintained between departing and arriving aircraft. And in this event, the controller allowed a loss of prescribed separation because he never determined the accurate position of the Southwest airplane. Surface detection equipment, such as ASDX or ASSC, allows air traffic controllers to track the movement of aircraft and vehicles operating on and near the airport surface and provides controllers with a visual and oral alert warning of potential conflicts when detected. The This equipment is especially useful when low visibility conditions exist, such as those on the morning of the incident. According to the FAA, at the time of the incident, there were 43 Part 139 airports with such technology installed. Austin was not one of those airports. For context, Part 139 airports have specific criteria, but are generally those serving regularly scheduled air carrier operations. The NTSB has long recognized the benefits of surface detection equipment, with related safety recommendations dating back more than 30 years. In 1991, Safety Recommendation A-91-29 asked the FAA to expedite the efforts to develop and implement an operational system to alert controllers about potential runway incursions. This recommendation, however, was closed in an unacceptable status and later superseded in 2000 with Safety Recommendation A-00-66, which asked the FAA to require a ground movement safety system that would prevent runway incursions by providing direct warning capability to flight crews. In the summer of 2023, in response to this safety recommendation, the FAA announced 3 technology sprints. These were the Surface Awareness Initiative, SAI, Approach Runway Verification, ARV, and the Runway Incursion Device, RID. It was later announced that Austin was proposed to receive all 3 of these technologies by the end of 2024. We found that if surface detection equipment had been installed at Austin, the controller could have easily determined and monitored the position of the Southwest airplane throughout their taxi and ground movement, and taken action to mitigate the traffic conflict between the Southwest and FedEx airplanes before it ever developed. In addition to Austin, we also found a need for surface detection capability at many airports not already equipped with ASDX or ASSC. Staff proposes a recommendation that the FAA equip all Part 139 airports not currently equipped with ASDX or ASSC, a surface detection equipment that tracks the movement of arriving and departing aircraft, determines proximity between aircraft, and provides air traffic controllers with visual and oral cues of surface movements to aid in their decision-making process. The SMIGS plan mentioned earlier is intended to facilitate the safe movement of aircraft and vehicles on the airport surface when runway visual range, or RVR, drops below 1,200 feet. Austin had a SMIGS plan. However, the plan was not activated on the morning of the incident, despite reported RVR values below 1,200 feet at the time. This was ruled out as a factor in the incident because the local controllers still should have been able to manage safely the Southwest airplane's departure using already established taxi and ground movement procedures. Even though the Austin SMIGS plan was not a factor in this incident, the investigation did find safety issues associated with the plan. Specifically, the Austin Control Tower and City of Austin Department of Aviation entered into a letter of agreement, or LOA, regarding the movement of aircraft and vehicles when the SMIGS plan was activated. The investigation discovered that language used in the Austin SMIGS plan and their associated LOA were poorly aligned, allowing for misinterpretation by air traffic control personnel, in this case, the operations supervisor. Additionally, the local controller could not recall any details about the SMIGS plan, and Austin Control Tower had no existing requirement to provide refresher training for the plan. We found the need for a fully aligned and properly trained SMIGS plan. SMIGS plans and their associated letters of agreement must have aligned language to avoid any misinterpretation. Additionally, controllers need to be sufficiently trained on all elements of a SMIGS plan in order to ensure timely and proper activation of the plan when necessary. Staff proposes a recommendation that the FAA require all airports with a SMIGS plan review their plans and associated letters of agreement to ensure alignment with each other and with the stakeholder duties and responsibilities as described in the related FAA advisory circular. Staff also proposes a recommendation that the FAA direct training administrators at airports with a SMIGS plan to require initial and follow-on refresher training for all stakeholders on the information in the airport's plan. Lastly, I would like to speak about controller training on low visibility operations in general, not directly related to SMIGs. According to facility records and information provided by the Austin Air Traffic Manager at the time, Austin Control Tower had not conducted training on low visibility operations during at least the 2 years preceding the incident, and we discovered no evidence that formal training on low visibility had ever been conducted at Austin. Additionally, we discovered no evidence that the local controller had worked a shift with low visibility conditions similar to those present on the morning of the incident for at least 1 year preceding the incident. As a result, the local controller was not adequately prepared to handle the traffic in the low visibility conditions that existed on the morning of the incident. We found that low visibility training might not be occurring at all airports, which is concerning because all operating control towers in the National Airspace System can be affected by low visibility conditions. We also found no FAA requirement for refresher training specifically pertaining to operations during low visibility conditions. Staff proposes that the FAA require training administrators at all operating control towers to conduct initial training and to require annual refresher training thereafter on operations during low visibility conditions, given that such conditions affect all air traffic control towers. This concludes my presentation, and now Dr. Sevillian will continue with his.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. Good morning. I will discuss the human performance issues in this incident. Specifically, I will discuss the local controller's decision-making regarding 3 factors: his expectations for departing airplanes, the FedEx approach and Southwest Airlines taxi to the runway, and the Southwest Airlines position on the runway. I will also discuss flight deck technology. Given previous experience with Southwest Airlines departures, the controller expected that when a Southwest Airlines pilot said that an airplane was ready to depart, the airplane would already be at the hold short line, and that, according to the controller, you give them the traffic and they go. A hold short line is a taxiway marking that indicates where an aircraft must stop unless the aircraft has already received clearance to enter the assigned runway. According to the ATC transcript, the Southwest Airlines incident airplane flight crew said, "We're ready," implying they were holding short of runway 18 left. However, as you saw in the animation, the Southwest Airlines incident airplane was 550 feet from the hold short line. Flight crews that were departing Austin on the morning of the incident used similar phraseology to communicate their location on the taxiway to the local controller when they requested their takeoff clearance. Thus, the controller would not have had a reason to question Southwest Airlines' position. The controller assumed that the Southwest Airlines airplane would depart uneventfully. Past interactions, such as the controller's experience with Southwest Airlines departing quickly after crews reported that they were holding short, or repetition, such as similar phrasing of takeoff clearance requests on the morning of the incident, can lead to expectation bias, which occurs when a person responds in a way that is consistent with what they expect rather than what is actually occurring. In addition, all previous departures that morning were unremarkable, despite the dense fog and reduced visibility that the flight crews encountered. The controller's assumption about Southwest Airlines' position on the taxi was likely due to expectation bias. This contributed to his lack of situational awareness. One way to determine an airplane's location was through position reporting, but the controller did not request position reports from departing airplanes. The controller's actions on the morning of the incident were not consistent with the intent of an FAA order, which required controllers to determine the position of an airplane before issuing takeoff clearance. According to the FAA order, the controller was required to apply a 2-mile separation between departing aircraft on its takeoff roll and arriving aircraft on final approach. The NTSB's aircraft performance study showed that the FedEx airplane was 2 miles from the runway, 18 left threshold, when the Southwest airplane entered the runway. The controller notified FedEx flight crew about Southwest Airlines departure. The controller was using his tower display workstation to determine the FedEx airplane's distance from the runway. Review of the tower display workstation records found that visual cues of the FedEx airplane's trajectory were available. The controller would have to use these cues along with the time on the workstation clock to determine the FedEx airplane's progress to the runway. Because the low visibility conditions limited the controller's view of FedEx airplane as it approached the runway, the controller would have to remember the FedEx airplane's position information while handling the Southwest airplane once FedEx descended below 800 feet due to radar limitations at the workstation. Southwest Airlines flight crew was aware of FedEx on short final. By the time that Southwest Airlines lined up with the runway 18 left center line, the separation between the two airplanes had decreased and was less than the required 2 miles. About 11 seconds later, the Southwest Airlines airplane was stopped on the runway. Several seconds afterward, the Southwest Airlines flight crew began the engine run-up procedure. The flight crew did not notify the controller that the airplane would be temporarily stopping on the runway, and the controller would not have known the airplane's position because of low visibility weather conditions that were present, and the lack of surface detection equipment in the tower. We found that there's a need for additional communication between controllers and flight crews. There is a potential for controllers to be unaware that an airplane has stopped on the runway, especially during low visibility weather conditions. Therefore, we are proposing one recommendation to the FAA. FAA require air traffic controllers to advise pilots through direct communication and ATC broadcasts when visual contact with aircraft operating on taxiways and runways cannot be established or maintained, and instruct pilots to provide accurate position reports to aid the controller in determining an aircraft's location in such conditions. We found that there's a need for updated procedural guidance. FAA guidance does not instruct pilots after receiving clearance for takeoff to notify controllers when additional time on the runway is needed before the takeoff roll. Therefore, we are proposing Nautical Information Manual, or AIM, with instructions to inform controllers before pilots enter an active runway with the intent to depart if they will need time on the runway for any reason before takeoff roll. We found that the controller did not account for the ambient and low visibility weather conditions when providing takeoff clearance to the Southwest Airlines airplane. Controllers should consider whether ambient or surface conditions might affect the timing of a takeoff roll. Therefore, we are proposing one recommendation to the FAA. FAA brief all air traffic controllers on the circumstances of this incident, emphasizing the effect that certain conditions might have on a flight crew's ability to begin takeoff in a timely manner, including low visibility weather conditions. The FedEx captain and first officer were concerned the Southwest Airlines airplane would be on the runway when they would be landing. Pilots focus on flight deck instrumentation during Category 3 auto land, which means the autopilot lands the airplane, but there's no indication on the flight deck of surface traffic. The first officer looked outside the airplane because his concern about Southwest Airlines' position on the runway. The first officer saw the Southwest Airline was still on the runway, at which time he called for a go-around, which the captain performed. Transport category airplanes are not currently required to have a system that provides visual and oral cues of nearby airplanes operating on the airport surface and early warnings to alert flight crews when a potential surface conflict exists. The FAA's response to safety recommendation A0066, which Mr. Soper previously discussed, did not address providing flight crews with direct alerting about potential runway incursions. NTSB made related recommendations as part of the January 2023 runway incursion incident at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. These recommendations included installation of flight deck technology with oral and visual alerting to reduce the risk of runway incursions and to provide this technology on new and existing airplanes. We found that there's a need for additional flight deck technology. There is a potential for airport surface conflicts if flight crews are not alerted on the flight deck of potential aircraft separation issues. We propose to reiterate 3 recommendations to the FAA that resulted from the John F. Kennedy runway incursion incident. FAA, collaborate with aircraft and avionics manufacturers and software designers to develop the technology for a flight deck system that would provide visual and oral alerts to flight crews of traffic on a runway or taxiway and traffic on approach to land. Install this technology on newly certificated transport category airplanes and retrofit existing transport category airplanes with this technology. This concludes my presentation. Mr. Garner will continue with his presentation.
Good morning. I'll provide general information about cockpit voice recorders and discuss their currently mandated recording duration and their impact on this and other NTSB investigations. Cockpit voice recorders, or CVRs, are among the most valuable tools for accident and incident investigations. CVRs record crew conversations, radio transmissions, and other sounds in the cockpit, which allows investigators to fully assess factors contributing to an accident or incident. Since 2008, CVRs have had a mandated recording duration of 2 hours. Once the 2-hour limit is reached, a CVR overwrites the oldest audio in a continuous loop until power is removed. In non-catastrophic accidents or incidents in which the airplane's electrical system remains functional, pilots or maintenance must act promptly to manually deactivate the CVR to preserve audio from the event before it is overwritten. The FedEx and Southwest airplanes involved in this incident were required to be and were equipped with CVRs that recorded a minimum of 2 hours of audio. After the incident, the FedEx airplane performed a go-around and landed at Austin at 7:05 local time. The FedEx airplane remained powered on the ground while cargo was offloaded and loaded, and then the airplane departed for Memphis at 8:23 local time. The airplane landed in Memphis at 10:07 local time, about 3 hours, 2 minutes after landing at Austin. Following the incident, the Southwest airplane continued to its intended destination of Cancun, Mexico. The airplane landed in Cancun at 9:47 Eastern Standard Time, about 2 hours, 28 minutes after departing Austin. Because the CVRs on both airplanes remained powered for more than 2 hours following the incident, audio from the incident on both airplane CVRs was overwritten. In 2018, the NTSB issued 2 safety recommendations to the FAA to increase the mandated recording duration of CVRs to a minimum of 25 hours. These recommendations followed a July 2017 incident at San Francisco International Airport, during which an Air Canada Airbus A320 lined up to land on a taxiway occupied by several airplanes. The CVR data were overwritten before Air Canada officials learned of the severity of that incident. Safety recommendation A-18-30 asks that the FAA require all newly manufactured airplanes that are required to be equipped with a CVR be fitted with one that could record a minimum of 25 hours of audio. Safety recommendation A-18-31 asks that the FAA require a retrofit of all CVRs on existing airplanes required to carry both a CVR and a flight data recorder with a CVR that could record a minimum of 25 hours of audio by January 2024. Since the issuance of these recommendations, at least 18 of our investigations have been hampered by overwritten CVR data, including 8 runway incursion events and a rapid decompression event that occurred on Alaska Airlines 737 MAX flight earlier this year. As part of the NTSB's investigation into a runway incursion incident at JFK Airport last year, the NTSB classified the retrofit recommendation closed unacceptable action and superseded it with a new retrofit recommendation, A-24-9, because the requested retrofit date of January 2024 had passed. On December 4th, 2023, the FAA published a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, which would require the installation of 25-hour CVRs on newly manufactured aircraft required to be equipped with a CVR. The NPRM did not address the NTSB's recommendation to retrofit existing airplanes with 25-hour CVRs. The service life of existing airplanes can exceed 40 years, and if not retrofitted, existing airplanes could fly for decades with a CVR that could be overwritten after an accident or incident. The FAA's justification for not retrofitting existing airplanes with 25-hour CVRs was that the cost to operators would be significant. However, the NTSB found that the FAA had overestimated the cost of retrofitting the existing fleet of airplanes covered by our recommendation. We found that a requirement to retrofit existing airplanes would apply to less than 1/2 the number of airplanes that the FAA had estimated, and that the retrofit could be completed during regular maintenance downtime, thereby reducing costs. On May 16, 2024, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 was signed into law. The act included new carriage requirements for 25-hour CVRs for aircraft operated under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations Part 121, which includes regularly scheduled large air carriers, regional air carriers, and cargo operators. Additionally, the new requirements applied to some other large transport category aircraft not operated under Part 121. The Act stipulated that the new CVR recording requirements were effective within 1 year for newly manufactured aircraft and within 6 years for existing aircraft. The airplanes involved in this incident would not be subject to the FAA's proposed rulemaking, but would be subject to a retrofit requirement under the Reauthorization Act within 6 years. We found that the CVR audio from this incident would have been available to this investigation if the airplanes had been equipped with CVRs that had a recording duration of 25 hours. The FAA's December 2023 NPRM did not include a requirement to retrofit existing airplanes with 25-hour CVRs, and the FAA has not yet issued a final rule for the 25-hour CVRs for newly manufactured airplanes. For this reason, staff proposes reiterating our 2 previous CVR-related recommendations to the FAA, specifically require all newly manufactured airplanes that must have a CVR be fitted with a CVR capable of recording the last 25 hours of audio, and require retrofit of all CVRs on all airplanes required to carry both a CVR and a flight data recorder with a CVR capable of recording the last 25 hours of audio. This concludes the staff presentations for this investigation. On behalf of all staff, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hauf, Mr. Soper, Dr. Sevillian, Mr. Garner, for those excellent presentations. We'll now turn to board member questions focused on the 4 safety issues. We will take a break at some point, maybe after the first safety issue or second, depending on how it goes. Those are, again, the first round of questions will be focused on communications between pilots and controllers. Second, aircraft surface detection equipment and flight technology. Third, training on the Surface Movement Guidance and Control System Plan, or SMIGS, and low visibility operations. And fourth, the need for 25-hour cockpit voice recorders. The purpose of this discussion and focused deliberation is to highlight those areas where we believe we can make the biggest difference to improve safety. Members are reminded to limit their questions to the specific safety issue at hand. We found that it helps the public better follow the discussion. Please be assured that if you have questions outside these areas, we will have a final catch-all round of questions at the end where board members can ask any questions they'd like. In each of these categories, we'll do multiple rounds. We want to make sure everybody is able to ask their questions. So let's begin the discussion with the first issue, communications between pilots and controllers, and I'm going to yield myself 5 minutes for questions. I want to start actually with the ground controller. Not the local controller. So we have, in listening to the certified audio recordings from FAA, Southwest says that the ground controller, that they're ready to taxi to 18 left. The ground controller reads it back, gives them their RVR, and asks if they're coming out of Gulf 2 or Gulf 3. Southwest confirms Gulf 2. Then the ground controller gives them directions for taxiing Gulf 2 to Gulf to Bravo and tells them to report back when they're at Bravo. Southwest repeats the communication back to the ground controller and says they're outbound. Ground controller tells them to contact the tower at the approach end of runway 18 left. Mr. Soper, what is considered the approach end?
That's a broad statement. Anything down near the approach end would be the approach end of that runway, to include the runway itself.
That's right.
End.
So as Southwest confirms and reads back the instructions, the ground controller did a great job on position reporting throughout. Now, Southwest is transferred to the local controller. They report they're short of runway 18 left, we're ready. What does that mean? Mr. Soper.
So I'm sorry. Yeah. So when the pilot reports that, in this case, the controller interpreted that as the pilot was holding short of the runway and was ready for departure clearance.
At the runway.
At the runway. That was the controller's perception.
But what does it mean in reality?
Exactly what he said. He was short of the runway, which could be anywhere that is short of the runway.
That's right. And so actually that morning, American 1913 takes off, ready for takeoff, 18 left. They're actually 450 feet away. Delta's at the runway, ready for departure. Southwest 1881 says they're ready, 200 feet away. Southwest 785. We're all set at the end. They are at the end on the hold short line. SkyWest says they're approaching 18 right at Charlie. The controller says cleared for departure, but they're 1,000 feet from the hold short line. American 2327, holding short 18 left at Bravo. They're 600 feet away. American 2549, 600 feet away, says we're ready at 18 left. Southwest 1542, 450 feet from the line. Southwest 1145, about 1,000. Then you got Southwest 708. So you don't consider Southwest 708, we're short of 18 left, we're ready, as an exact position?
Correct, I would not.
What should that communication have been between the pilot and the controller? Or the controller and the pilot?
So in this case, the pilot's initial communication with them of their position was an acceptable initial thing, but then it was on the air traffic controller to clarify that, to know the precise position of that airplane. So a better example of communication in that case, a more precise position from the pilot would have been, we're at the hold short line of runway 18 left, we're ready, or we're holding short of runway 18 left, we're ready, would be more precise reports. Or clarification on the part of the controller might be, confirm you're at the hold short. Confirm, and confirming that position so that they then had an exact position of that aircraft before issuing an instruction.
Or where they are on the taxiway?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll yield back my time recognize 5 minutes for Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, team. I commend you on your investigation, the draft report, and your presentation today. Great job. I'm going to stay with this line of questioning right here, as being a pilot myself. So we talked about, the chair talked about what the actual verbiage was, and that they pretty much were given to report at the approach end of 18 left. And where that exactly is, we don't know, do we? We guess. We guess about that location, and looking at the other aircraft that day, they all were pretty much in line with the same verbology there. What was interesting to note also with the ground control, that they did ask a lot of the aircraft that had taxied out that morning to give a position on Gulf at times, at which times I think every aircraft did acknowledge that when asked. Some were then given instructions of when to contact tower, and other ones were not. So at that point, what does a pilot or what does a controller expect of a pilot when they're given that? They give a position report to the ground controller. What's the next thing that, would it be the ground controller or the local controller would expect?
Once the ground controller has finished and has handed the aircraft off or instructed the pilot to contact tower, regardless of what additional information they gave with them, the initial contact with local control would be, in most of these cases that you've seen that morning, they were all being handed off at the departure end for departure. So if they check in ready, we expect that an air traffic controller expects them to be ready for departure as soon as they give them the clearance without undue delay.
Exactly. So if not given anything else from the ground controller, as a pilot, I would be expected to contact the local controller, which is what pilots would call tower control. Would that be correct, Mr. Abrams, that at somewhere near the hold short line, then a pilot would call for that they're ready for takeoff?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. What I thought was interesting going through the interviews of the first officer and the captain of Southwest Airlines was they both had mentioned in their interviews that after they checked in on Gulf, that they were told to monitor tower and after reporting on Gulf. Now, I see that a lot at a lot of airports. They're asked to monitor, and a lot of times they're monitoring tower frequency, and tower will tell them when they're ready to go. And if they're not ready to go, the crew should tell them that. But in this case, that's not what they were told to do. They were told to contact tower at the approach end, not monitor. So I thought that was interesting. How far out were they from the hold short line when they made the call to tower?
550 feet.
550 feet, yeah. Okay. Mr. Soper, when you were interviewing the local controller, was in your discussion or your questioning, was there ever a point that the local controller became concerned about the separation of the two aircraft?
He did. He related to us that he did become concerned, especially once he was no longer able to see FedEx on radar as well. And when he had not heard the telltale sound of that departure Southwest actually spooling up and departing. And he became concerned that he might have a situation.
Do we know how far out the aircraft, the FedEx, was from the Southwest flight at that point?
I believe Marie Moeller might have that information for us precisely.
To clarify as to exactly what point you're interested in?
Yeah, from the interview, do we know about what distance out that was it about 2 miles or maybe inside 2 miles?
So FedEx was 2 miles out as Southwest was turning onto the runway. So by the time that Southwest came to a stop, they were within 2 miles. They were about 1.5 miles out.
1.5 miles. Mr. Soper, what would have been the controller's options at that point with respect to each aircraft?
He had several options. He could have canceled the takeoff clearance for Southwest and sent FedEx around with a controller-initiated go-around. He could have confirmed, once he was inside of 2 miles, he had already broken separation at that point without a confirmation that he had a rolling departure. So, but that would have been the number one thing he could have done at that point, is to send FedEx around and cancel Southwest takeoff clearance.
Okay, thank you for that. I see my time's up.
Thank you. Member Chapman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I only have a couple of questions in this area. I do have some others, but I'm going to save those for the catch-all round. They relate to TCAS. First of all, thank you, staff, for the great work on the investigation and the draft report. Very much appreciate that. The draft report cites an FAA order which requires controllers to determine the position of an aircraft before issuing takeoff clearance or other instructions. And it provides further that, and I'm quoting, when ATC is unable to determine position visually or via a display system, position reports may be used. Is this instruction sufficiently prescriptive? And I ask that because this seems to be an important layer of safety to help ensure locational accuracy and awareness by controllers, yet it provides discretion. Controllers may, or apparently may not, ask for position reports. Can I just ask you to comment on that?
I think that there's left some variance there because there could be other things. If the pilot already gave a precise position report maybe upon check-in, then he's established the exact location of that aircraft without asking anything. And so they say if you don't have equipment to otherwise be able to do that, a way to do that is through position reporting to get that precise position. And if you, essentially, that's really the only way you have, is either the pilot's voluntary report or your request for the pilot to report.
Right.
If you don't have equipment and you cannot see.
So we have a draft recommendation we're considering today. I don't have the text in front of me at the moment, but I think it would help tighten this up a little bit as I read the recommendation. Am I correct?
Yes, I think I understand what you're saying. Yes, sir.
Expectation bias. Expectation bias is featured prominently in this investigation, and the draft report notes that NTSB has investigated other incidents that involved errors resulting from expectation bias. Can I ask, please, would you briefly discuss how expectation bias contributed to the 2017 San Francisco and the 2023 JFK incidents, both of which we investigated?
I was not the investigator on those two incidents, but what I do know is that several of our investigations have quoted expectation bias that it has contributed to the incident.
Thank you. So in the JFK incident in particular, what are the similarities? What can you sort of compare and contrast how expectation bias played a role in the JFK incident and then this incident?
I can talk about the role that expectation bias in this particular incident. And for the Austin case, the controller in the beginning, when he started providing services to the Southwest Airlines airplane, he had a lot of assumptions that Southwest Airlines is their most ready carrier. And that they would be ready to take off when he asked them to be at the hold short line. And during that time frame, he asked several aircraft that morning to be at the hold short line. And so within the 4 or 5 years that he had been at Austin, he just assumed that would happen. So he had an expectation that they would be there. But as we discussed earlier, Southwest Airlines was about 550 feet away from the hold short line. So his expectation was inaccurate.
And again, that expectation was based upon prior experience with Southwest Airlines crews, correct?
That is correct, and that's a good point because prior experience can exacerbate the bias.
Very good, thank you. Chair, I'll save my other questions for the catch-all round.
Thank you. Member Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hauf and the team for an extensive work on this report. We talked a lot about Southwest airplane holding short. Can you speak more about how and when the local controller set expectations to the flight crews for holding short?
Actually, the local controller, in review of all of the audio information that we had available to us, which was everything that morning for the local controller, there was no evidence that he ever verbally provided an expectation to the crews that morning for expected position.
Okay. What responsibility does Southwest airline crew have in communicating with controllers?
It's imperative that they establish good communications with the controller if there is anything out of the ordinary. If everything is normal, standard operating procedures work great. But as we saw with the limited visibility, things can fall apart pretty quick. Aircraft taxi slower, and to be more precise in their position on the taxiway and on the runway. So good communication with the controller is imperative.
Several aircraft responded slightly differently when approaching the whole short line. Is there a required response?
So there is not currently a prescribed phraseology for pilots to use or a specific location that they must report at. And I would say that it's routine and common for pilots approaching the runway to let air traffic control know at various intervals that they're ready at the end, because if possible, it's always beneficial for air traffic to have that heads up and to keep that aircraft moving if they can without having to make them stop. So it's not uncommon for that to happen, but in days like this, and I think what we're trying to point out here is the imperativeness that air traffic control has to be very clear with precise position, because they cannot see, and if they're going to affect separation, they can't do that without having those positions.
Okay. My next question is regarding air traffic controller fatigue. The report makes reference that at the time of the incident in the Austin Air Traffic Controller Center was, quote, mandatory 6-day work weeks due to staffing shortages, and the controller was scheduled to work, quote, an 8-hour overtime shift on the day of the incident. The air traffic manager, in referencing why some controllers' training hadn't been accomplished was because of staffing issues, added, quote, 6-day work weeks can take a toll. I noticed that the report indicates that the local controller was not fatigued. How did staff determine that?
Yes, so staff determined that the local controller was not fatigued through a series of steps. One of the things that we look at in investigations is a 72-hour history. And when we look at the 72-hour history, we take a look at sleep opportunities. We're looking for acute and chronic related issues in terms of sleep. In this case, we took the controller had mild obstructive sleep apnea. So we reviewed his CPAP records. We found that he used a CPAP machine less than 4 hours prior to the incident. But the research indicates that you can't utilize just the CPAP data in isolation, that you have to understand if there were any opportunities for sleep. So we utilized the controller's cell phone records to understand about how much time he had prior to the incident in terms of sleep. And we determined that he had adequate sleep opportunities. Another thing to mention, I want to mention, is that he had a couple of days off prior to the incident as well, is what we found out. So that's in terms of his sleep schedule. But another part in terms of determining fatigue is we look at performance. And we listened to the air traffic control audio, and we did not hear any readback related issues that for the controller. We did not hear any yawning or anything like that. So we take an approach where we collect data from 72-hour history and also the performance of the controller to determine if they were fatigued. And in this case, the controller was not.
Thank you, Chairman. My time.
Thank you. Member Inman.
Thank you. Thank you to the staff for everything you put into this. I know it's a lot of work. I'm going to start with Captain Abrams. As a pilot, would you think if you were cleared for takeoff and you also were informed there was landing traffic on a 3-mile final, what would you think? Would you think you would need to hurry? What different actions might you take?
On a clear day, such we have in Washington, D.C. here today, 3 miles, I've got time. When I'm taxiing slower, reduced visibility of 1,200 in the touchdown, 600 in the mid, and 1,600 in the rollout, I'm taking my time, and my 3 miles separation is going to be up before I know it. So I probably should inform the controller if I'm going to need additional time, or if I'm taxiing slower, or if that's just not going to work. We're not ready. Anything you should say to the controller to create a little bit additional time.
Okay, thank you. The controller actually mentioned that he would listen for an engine noise to determine if an airplane was taking off. Is this something that's actually taught for low visibility, or is it common knowledge? Where does that play into the thought process?
I don't know of a formal training from that perspective, but I will say in my experience as an air traffic controller and in working with many of my colleagues, it is very common and routine in controller training to be taught about using your peripheral senses all the time to maintain the best possible scan and situation awareness during an operation. So that's your peripheral hearing, your peripheral sight, just anything that's there. You're listening, it's that third ear or that, that they talk about. So it is very common for it to be taught throughout controller training, but I don't know of a formalized instruction that does that.
Okay. I know the chair read a lot of some of the transcript that was going on with ATC, but how would you categorize the traffic that day? Heavy, light, medium?
So it wouldn't be fair for me to categorize it because I don't work at that airport on a regular basis. However, we did ask that question of both controllers that were working in there at the time, which are both fully certified in the tower, and both controllers classified the traffic volume on the morning of the event as a 1 on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the heaviest and 1 being the lightest.
So it was operating at what they consider the lightest of any time of Austin operation. Is that based just on the time of the day, or is that based on overall operations in a 24-hour period?
That's a good question. We asked them that as well, and they said that that was normal for that time of day and tempo of operation.
Okay, thank you. In the animation that we had, we heard the comment that FedEx called for Southwest Airlines to abort. Do we have any evidence or any knowledge if Southwest heard that abort call?
In the transcript, the first officer, the Southwest first officer, indicated that he did hear the abort call. He looked over at the captain. They were in a high-speed region with their airspeed, and the captain later said that he did not hear it, and he probably would not have aborted anyway because of the high speed that they were already attained when the call was made.
And let me clarify, Captain. Whenever you said the transcript, that was of the interview, not the transcript of the CVR.
That is correct. We transcribed the interview.
Okay, thank you. No other questions, Chair?
Thank you. At some point, ATC or the local controller gave it said maintain 3,000 and gave a heading, I think 080 to FedEx, and then it told Southwest to turn right. Where did the controller think Southwest was at that point?
At that point in time, the controller thought that Southwest was still on the ground and that Southwest was the one that called the abort.
Where was Southwest?
Southwest was rotating.
Yep. So I know Mike has some questions on Southwest. Sorry, Member Graham. I mean, we are so formal. So I'll hold on some of my additional ones on the Southwest and ATC communications. I do want to talk about FedEx communications. So Cat 3 ILS approach, what is the crew for a Cat 3 ILS approach normally doing in the cockpit, Warren?
On a Cat 3 approach, the crew is monitoring their instrumentation and gauges explicitly. You don't have to see the land. It's a completely automated landing with no visual outside cues available to you. You rely on what your gauges are telling you inside. So you have a pilot flying, which is, in this case, the captain. The captains always do the Cat 3 approach. The first officer, who is the pilot monitoring, and they monitor the instrumentation and the gauges.
So the captain's head may be down, that would be normal, and maybe lift up at 50 feet or so, which at this point would have been on top of the Southwest plane.
Yeah, 50 feet you have an alert height,
yeah,
and you can sneak a peek, but no requirement to look outside.
And not suggesting there should be, I just think it's pretty amazing that in this case, they were very aware that they're about to land on a runway where Southwest 708 is cleared for takeoff. And so in this case, they're listening to, what's the communications between ATC and Southwest, and at some point question, wait a second, are we landing on 18 left to ATC, right?
Yes, it's highly unusual to have other traffic on the runway when you're conducting a Category 3 approach. We have what we call a critical area that ATC protects, and usually the runway is part of the critical area. However, in Austin, runway 18 left is not part of the critical area that has to be protected.
That's right. And so at this point, the first officer looks up, is looking around, and reports in the interview that he sees a left white position light and a silhouette of the Southwest plane. I mean, there's no visibility. I went through the simulator with this at FedEx in Memphis. It's incredible. Is that normal that you might have somebody looking outside? Obviously, there's conversations back and forth, but I think it's really incredible.
Yeah, I would say so as well. You're using your situational awareness. FedEx is obviously aware that Southwest is on the runway, has been cleared for takeoff. The controller asks Southwest, are you rolling? Southwest says we are. And FedEx is getting ready to touch down. They're looking at their radio altimeter, and they're just hundreds of feet before touching down on the runway. Just human instinct. Yeah, I'm looking out the window too, see what I can see. If there's an airplane out there, I need to know about it.
Yeah, but and normally you wouldn't really have to, which could have led to something more catastrophic. So thank God that did happen. I was really struck in the interview with the first officer and the captain when you or Dr. Sevillian asked what was the tip-off that something was wrong, and
well, the tip-off is, they've got conversation going with Southwest Airlines. That's that's not normal.
And the real tip-off that was highlighted was when Southwest said, "Rollin' now."
Rolling now. Yes.
It was the now.
Yeah.
And it was go around, go around, go around. And I have to give kudos in my last 11 seconds. We'll get into training later, but really to some of the training that occurred at FedEx leading up to that, and their discussion of training, which helped in this scenario at Austin.
I realize I'm jumping into your allotted time, but they did have startled go-arounds in their last recurrent training. And, you were not anticipating to go around, and the instructor in the sim gives them a go-around maybe at 50 feet above the runway or something like that. So they had been properly trained for these low-altitude go-arounds.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to the Southwest Airlines interviews, the crew interviews there. Were the crew members asked about if they were concerned about the traffic on 3 Mile Final when they were cleared for takeoff in the low visibility conditions?
No, they were not.
They were not. When were the interviews done with this crew? How long after the incident?
Approximately 2.5 weeks after the event.
2.5 weeks.
And I can elaborate on that if you'd like.
Go right ahead.
These interviews were basically postponed because we wanted to record them. And on February 15th, the chair wrote a letter to ALPA President Jason Ambrosi outlining our recording policy. Now, this was ALPA got it, but SWAPA got wind of the recording policy that the NTSB is operating under, and then we were allowed to record the pilot interviews without subpoena, and that's what was the immediate holdup or delay. But the chair's letter to ALPA was the catalyst that broke the dam that allowed us to go forward with these interviews.
Thank you for that. In that, when I asked about the concerns by either crew member, I thought it was interesting, being, 2.5 weeks later, in the captain's interview, and I quote this from the docket. He said, "It was maybe an aggressive clearance, but it wasn't concerning. I think, the aircraft was not stopping. It was going to be a continuous motion, and it was not a concern."
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go right ahead. Do you have any comment on that?
The continuous motion was not stopping at the whole short line. It was not stopping to do an engine run-up. That was later. They fully intended to do the engine run-up, stop on the runway once they were aligned to do the engine run up, but the not stopping was you don't have to stop at the whole short line. You set the brakes, release the brakes, then taxi in position and do the engine run up. It takes a while to get those big engines spooled up and get going again.
Sure, and I thought that was really interesting, seeing that they were required to do an engine run-up. It was briefed in the weather briefing before they backed out, according to the first officer. So I just feel like there's a little bit of lack of situational awareness here as to the timing and the distance from the aircraft clear to land.
Yes.
And everything I'm hearing here also is with the other aircraft too, it just seems like it's a normal day out there. But we know it's not. It's a low visibility day, which doesn't happen very often in Austin, but everybody's treating it as such. And unfortunately, the tower can't see Southwest on the ground. Southwest can't see FedEx, and FedEx can't see the runway in Southwest. So it's not a normal day.
No.
But everybody's treating it as such. So, you know, it may be sound like I'm being a little bit critical, an armchair quarterbacking this or splitting hairs about with the controller and the Southwest crew, and I am. And why is that? Because we had two aircraft come within less than 200 feet of each other, and that shouldn't have happened. I'm very glad we're talking about a near miss today and not the other result that could have happened. We could be talking about a tragedy. So why am I doing this? I'm pointing out that the system failed in this event, in this incident. Aviation has earned its safety record by establishing redundancy in everything it does, its systems, its processes, its people, and its technology. In this case, we didn't have ground radar to assist the controller, and there was no cockpit test technology to assist the crew in determining a potential collision was developing on the runway. But our process and procedures, and in this case, in the form of judgment, decision-making, and situational awareness, failed the controller and the Southwest crew. If it wasn't for FedEx crew's last-minute go-around, we might be having a different discussion today. As controllers and air crew, we should be using this as a training and an awareness event to make sure we never let our guard down, we don't become complacent, and always take the most conservative approach to controlling and operating our aircraft on the ground and in the sky. Thank you, Chair.
Great comments. Member Chapman?
Chair, no additional questions in this area.
All right. Member Brown?
No additional questions, Chair.
Member Inman?
I've got just a couple of follow-ups.
Yep.
And I know Member Brown mentioned this in regard to review of the fatigue on the controller. Did we do the same background and 72-hour look back on all four of the flight crew?
Yes, we did the same review of the 72-hour history with the FedEx and Southwest Airlines crew.
And the outcome?
The outcome is that the FedEx crew were not well rested. We noted that they had a small amount of sleep prior to the incident. But one of the things that's important to consider when looking at or determining if fatigue is an issue is the first thing that we do is we do take a look at the sleep opportunities. We're looking for acute or chronic related sleep-related issues. But in this case, the performance of the crew on the morning of the incident was per the procedures. The FedEx crew conducted the Cat 3 ILS auto-land procedure. They communicated effectively, and then we had a situation where the first officer looked outside of the airplane, which is not part of that procedure, and noticed the silhouette of the Southwest Airlines on the surface. So when we look at fatigue, we look at two things. We look at the amount of sleep coupled with performance. And in this case, we know that they were just not well rested, but not fatigued.
Great. And it's an important distinction, correct?
Absolutely.
And fatigue is not really, fatigue is a term we use. Well rested may be a little bit more variable and hypothetical.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Also, earlier it was indicated that the SMIGS was not activated, but probably didn't affect the incident. Could it have been affected if the controller's awareness, as well as the Southwest crews, therefore kind of impacting the confirmation bias?
We did look at that, and it is, while it's possible that it could have altered an awareness on one or both parts of that. In this case, the activation of the SMIGS plan just was not deemed a factor because the procedures were very clear of what was required on the part of air traffic control, and they had adequate procedures to safely move and separate these aircraft at the time. So and there were too many variables to the SMIGS, unfortunately. So we asked ourselves, had SMIGS been implemented, what would have changed? And based on the information that was available and that we were able to pull from that on-site, some stuff wouldn't have changed at all. And the likelihood is, or I'm sorry, not the likelihood, there was really no way to determine what may have done different because aircraft may have moved differently that day based on taxi instructions. So because it was so much skepticism, on figuring out like what if, coulda, we went with what the procedure says.
Like an impossible decision tree.
Yes, a little bit.
Okay, thank you. No other questions, Chair.
Thank you so much. I do just sort of want to run through the Southwest communications between the air traffic controller and Southwest. First of all, for those who are not familiar with aviation, what's a transponder?
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
All right, so a transponder is a device on the airplane that transmits data usually related to position and identification of the airplane, and it'll transmit that data to ground stations and other airplanes.
And you would need radar in ATC to figure that out? Or there would be...
Yeah, I think I'll let Brian Soper talk about how ATC uses that information.
Yeah, the radar system in air traffic control would pick up that what we would call secondary radar, which is the transponder beacon codes. Okay.
Warren, and is it clear that if you turn on your transponder, when you get your clearance, is it clear that in low visibility environments that flight crews know that ATC can't see them?
No, that's not clear. Procedurally, Southwest, FedEx, United, American, Delta, they all turn their transponder on prior to pushback. Now, they turn them on in different phases. Southwest turns their transponder on once they receive their ATC clearance there at the gate. But it's not clear. And the reason they turn it on is so they can be seen by the ground control radar.
And as they're moving.
As pilots, you don't know. You're just making the assumption, well, I turn my transponder on, they must be able to see me.
So you're assuming, hey, there's a surface surveillance system, they can see me. You haven't memorized the 43 airports in the United States out of all the airports that it would be at, which we will get into shortly. Mr. Soper, in your experience, maybe not as an investigator, in speaking with air traffic control and flight crews, do the flight crews, are they aware in low visibility conditions that ATC can't see them?
No. From a personal level, I've spoken to many pilots, specifically over the last year and a half, commercial as well as private, and asked the question, do you feel air traffic control can see you all the time? And 100% of the pilots felt that they were able to see them one way or another through technology, a display in the tower. Of course they could. They got a radar display in the tower. They would just see me there if the visibility is bad enough.
Which is why position reporting, progressive taxi instructions are so important.
Absolutely imperative for air traffic.
Okay, and I will not continue on because I could, but I think communications is a two-way street. Certainly, there are requirements on ATC that should have been followed readbacks, position reporting, everything. Southwest crew did everything they're required to do, but then there's good communication, especially in low visibility conditions and not making assumptions. And I think here there could have been better communication back and forth. I will just ask, and Member Inman mentioned this quote, the controller reported to NTSB that he and the operations supervisor had told departing flight crews to report when their airplanes were holding short, and that when they got to the approach end, oh no, this is a different one, that approach end for everybody to hold short. Did that occur?
The ground controller was using position reporting in progressive taxi. The local controller was not.
But nobody said report back when you get to the hold short line.
No, I don't recall that statement being used on any of them.
No, I looked. And then the question I was going to get at was the engine and hearing the engine over just for the ATC to hear the engine. Is that the sign of a good safety culture and great safety?
No. The concern there is that we need both vision and the ability to hear. In this case, the local controller could not see outside of the control tower, and he was using his sense of hearing to hear the engines. And we know that he couldn't hear them at the time he was trying to.
Great. Last question. How would you describe safety culture, Mr. Soper, at ATC in Austin?
I think that question may be better answered by Mr. Sevillian.
We had an opportunity to interview the local controller, and the local controller told us that the safety culture, and from his perspective, when we asked from 1 to 10, he knew the safety culture was a 10. However, when we look at the evidence in terms of the low visibility training, the lack of it, and the lack of execution of the SMIGs, the safety culture had to be less than 10, and it was an inadequate safety culture.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to now move to the, oh, yes, sorry, Member Graham.
Thank you. I just want to clean up a couple questions here. We talked a lot about the run-up. Captain Abrams, was a run-up required? Engine run-up?
Yes, it was required, but it is ambiguity. There's a lot of ambiguity in the Southwest manual about is it required or is it not required. The engine run-up follows or mirrors very closely the manufacturer's procedure when it talks about when engine anti-ice is in use and the outside air temperature is -3 degrees Celsius or below. The manufacturer is very specific and says perform the following engine run-up. The Southwest manual, of course, the Southwest pilots don't have access to the Boeing books, but the Southwest manuals give you a highly recommended 30 seconds whenever possible if airport congestion and runway surface conditions allow. So the Southwest manuals kind of give you a little bit of out on that engine run-up.
I agree. And should the crew have advised Tower that they were going to require extra time on the runway before rolling?
In my professional opinion, yes.
Yes, but it's not spelled out in the AIM, is that correct?
That is correct. You know, when you're cleared for takeoff, that runway belongs to you as the pilot. I can do what I need to do. Yeah, I might have to delay because the flight attendants aren't ready in the back. I may have a passenger standing up. There's multiple reasons where I need to delay, but I should inform the controller of that situation. But that runway is mine when I'm cleared for takeoff.
Thank you for that. And I know we pointed out in the AIM, and I know the AIM is a massive book. Nobody can remember everything out of that, but we did point out in there that under communications that the tower controller will consider the pilot's turbine-powered aircraft are ready for takeoff when they reach the runway or the warm-up block, unless otherwise advised. I also pointed out to the team under air traffic clearance in the AIM, and this is for all the pilots out there, under pilot actions, when you receive a clearance from ATC, it says pilots shall promptly comply with the air traffic clearance upon receipt, except as necessary to cope with an emergency, and then, if such, advises ATC as soon as possible to obtain an amended clearance if deviation is necessary. So if you read between the lines, as a pilot, you should be taken off right away. And if you need time on the runway, please ask Tower before you get out there. That's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Other questions for this round? No. I will just add to what Member Graham said, which I think are excellent points. Who's responsible for separation of aircraft?
Air traffic control.
Who's responsible by law for the safety of the flight crew members and passengers in that passenger plane?
That'd be the captain of the airplane.
That's right. Which is why even if ATC is not communicating as the captain of the airplane, you better be communicating. And you also probably have the experience to know how long it takes a 767 to land on a 3-mile final when they were told a 767 was landing on a 3-mile final, correct? Before they were even on the runway.
We're getting back into situational awareness with that fog out there. I don't think the Southwest crew realized how far they were from the runway, taking the runway, what they had to accomplish. I think the Southwest just really lost their situational awareness out there at that moment.
At that moment. But then you get on the runway, you stop, you're performing a 30-second run-up, which you actually performed for 19 seconds because you know your A767 is barreling down on you, correct?
Correct.
Yep. All right, thanks. So we're going to move into the second safety issue, airport surface detection equipment and flight deck technology. And I'm going to recognize Member Graham for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Austin Airport did not have surface detection equipment, ASDX, or the Airport Surface Surveillance Capability, ASSC. Will they ever have an opportunity to get that?
ASDX or ASSC, no. Those have been sunsetted as new installs and won't be installed at any more airports, according to the FAA.
Correct. So what are the options available out there for Austin and airports similar to Austin?
So currently, the FAA announced this summer of 2023 3 technology sprints that included 3 technologies in this area. One was the Surface Awareness Initiative that I mentioned, will be and the other is the Approach Runway Verification, and the last is the Runway Incursion Device. All of them are scheduled to be installed at a number of airports. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but there's an aggressive waterfall by the FAA to get them installed. Austin is identified to get all 3.
Okay. Do we know anything about the capabilities? Has the team been able to see this in action or take a look at the proposed technology?
So we have not been able to see it yet. We have not seen a prototype or a display. Everything we have is informational that's been provided to us by the FAA on the basics of what it does and what it would provide.
With what they provided, which one of these or which combination of these might have prevented this incident from happening?
It's difficult to answer without all of the information on the various systems regarding what they alert for or what they predict or pick up. But the Surface Awareness Initiative would have been impactful from the standpoint that would have provided the controller a visual of the aircraft moving around on the airport, on an airport display in the tower. So they would have had situational awareness of precisely where that airplane, where the airplane was. The runway incursion device, that would have provided some situational awareness for the controller. However, that is dependent on input by the controller. It is a memory aid type of system where they would have to do something in order to make that work. And then the approach runway verification, in this case, it would be unsure because if I read what is available to me so far, it doesn't say that it would actually provide an alert for an aircraft that might be on a runway. It's actually a runway verification if they're lined up for the wrong runway or wrong surface.
Great, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I look forward to getting a peek at this as soon as possible to see its capabilities, as you do too. I do appreciate the fact that the presentation pointed out our recommendations that went back all the way to 1991 and then superseded in 2000. And at this point, we have basically superseded it again and broken that into two recommendations. One that we put out for the flight deck technology into the cockpit, the alerts going directly to the crew by having to go through an intermediate controller in this case, but also having another recommendation out for equipment in the tower for the controller also. I think I'm going to stop right there and I'll come back in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. My questions in this area actually track pretty closely to Member Graham's, and I appreciate the answers you provided. I just do want to confirm, it's my understanding that ASDX and ASSC, FAA has discontinued entirely installation of those technologies, correct?
As far as new installs, that is correct. They continue to support the existing systems.
And we have these, what FAA refers to as sprints, these 3 sprints, Surface Awareness Initiative, Approach Runway Verification, and Runway Incursion Device. I'm not sure you responded to this. Do those exist yet?
Yes, actually the ARV specifically is installed at 13 airports right now, Austin being one of them.
Okay.
So that is in there. As far as I know, and we were unable to clarify for certain, the other 2 systems are not currently operational in control towers. However, they are waterfalled for install by certain dates that the FAA has put out.
And do we know what the basis of these technologies are? Is it this radar? Is it ADS-B? Is it?
That's a great question. That's probably the most significant difference that you'll see between ASD and ASSC and that technology and these 3 technologies here. All 3 of these technologies, they are ADS-B dependent. So they do not have a ground radar that's installed. They don't use, ASDX and ASSC are multi-source, whereas these are single source, essentially, and dependent on ASB to operate.
And if they're now look, I understand that ADS-B is not going to be available with respect to all aircraft. So, but if it's ADS-B based, I'm assuming that might mean that the cost is a little less.
I can't speak directly to the cost other than anecdotally of what the FAA has stated numerous times, that there is a significant cost savings with regard to utilizing this type of technology.
Yeah, and that's a fair answer. I know we're not in the cost business here, but certainly that might have an impact in terms of greater utilization of these technologies. I'm going to ask a smart aleck question here. What the heck is a sprint?
I think that, well, you know what, I'd be giving you my opinion on that. There's no definition for sprint out there.
Can I just speculate that this is one of those kind of catchy management type phrases that seems like it should mean something, but probably doesn't, kind of like punching above your weight and that kind of thing? I mean,
I think it was on the heels of the safety summit that the FAA hosted that summer and the runway incursions, and they wanted to be clear that they were engaging.
Well, if it means do it fast, then I hope they will do it fast. I guess my next question would be do we know, and it sounds like we probably don't, is it FAA's intention to install all 3 technologies rather than adopt one of the 3 as a preferred approach, or is this going to be sort of a depends on the situation or a combination kind of strategy?
I may not be able to answer that directly. What I will say is these 3 technologies are independent of each other and do different things. So they wouldn't be one preferred over the other, probably.
Okay.
They do different things.
So they might even work in combination with each other in some circumstances.
Certainly.
Okay. I understand we have 517 airports certified under Part 139. ASDX is installed at 35 airports, and ASSC is installed at 9 airports. Not installing these technologies anymore, but we do have it at this relative handful of airports. What's FAA's plan to maintain these existing ASDX and ASSC systems? Do we know?
I do not know that.
Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Member Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I got to say, I really appreciate you going to the NTSB recommendation history regarding the flight dock technology. So that was answered in the questions in your presentation. But why couldn't the controller see FedEx on a radar below 800 feet?
So the below 800 feet, I know it sounds like in some of the verbiage there that there's a direct cutoff. At 800 feet, you no longer see the airplane. That's not quite accurate. Radar is subject to coverage area. It's an antenna, receiver, transmitter, and so in that area, the radar coverage commonly falls off around 800 feet, and that's where that number is coming from, and so they would no longer see him on radar at that point once he drops below the radar coverage for their area.
Thank you. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you. Member Inman.
Thank you. Just want to follow up on something that was said a few moments ago regarding this technology being dependent solely on ADSB. Often we look at commercial airliners and consider that as to being the primary, but there's a lot of GA out there. If that is solely dependent on ADSB, does that mean that it might not be able to track general aviation that's operating in that field?
That's correct. It would not track them if they did not have ADSB out.
So this new technology that's supposed to make things better is going to miss about roughly 25% of all general aviation aircraft out there right now? And I'm using that as a percentage from the NBAA right now.
Sure. Yes. It's important to understand vehicles would also need to be equipped with ADSB out. Ground vehicles, truck, van, car.
Every piece of equipment, de-icers, you name it.
Also different from ASD and ASSC, which can track a non-transponder equipped or ADSB equipped vehicle on the ground and see it because it has primary radar. These systems would not.
Okay. Whenever we talk about the SAI, will it have warnings that comes with it, or is it just an awareness program that you have to kind of look and see?
It does include alerting according to the FAA's information on that program.
Okay. So if let's go back to just Austin and specifically, if ASDX would have been installed, what warnings would have happened? What would we have seen or heard? What would have came out of that?
It's hard to say because every adaptation and safety logic is adapted to a particular airport and when they would pick up and when they would actually alert. But in this case, with an aircraft on the runway and an aircraft cleared on an arrival, a common alert might be runway occupied, go around. It gives you what the problem is and an instruction to follow.
And so it would just be an audio cue that would be a pre-programmed voice of some sort?
It would be visual and audio, yes.
Okay. So our reports talked about that there's actually one company right now that is doing the flight deck system. Can you talk about how far along that might be in development and certification? And also, as a follow-up to that, is anyone else also developing similar technology?
I can't speak on in terms of the organization or company that where they are in their engineering process and design and certification. However, I will note that the flight deck technology that is being developed is focused on a lot on human factors in terms of being able to provide visual and oral cues to the pilot, which is essential in the case of being able to show information regarding a possible separation issue on the surface.
Is that similar to the warnings that now are happening? Because there's audio and visual that happen in the cockpit already. Is that a totally different set, or would be integrated with those cues?
It depends. Each organization is different. Normally, a supplier for example, will develop their system, and they'll have a certain amount of human engineering related requirements that's provided for that system. And the integrator who is going to put that system on board the aircraft will have a set of requirements as well. Normally, the supplier and the integrator works together to determine what's the best or most feasible way of designing and integrating that system, and that's normally the process to get to certification.
Okay. I think I'll yield for other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Hoyt, how many years ago did we first recommend surface surveillance technology?
In 1991, we made a recommendation to the FAA to develop a system, develop and implement a system.
33 years.
Yes.
33 years ago. Repeatedly, correct?
Yes.
Yep. And when did they put in this sprint of 3 technologies that I also question their capability? After or before Austin?
I believe it was after
Yes,
Austin.
after Austin. So apparently, we only plug holes in the dam and don't address them proactively. I'm going to ask, and I've been very vocal on this issue and going to continue to be. I'm going to use a quote of somebody I am a big fan of. Human error is a symptom of a system that needs to be redesigned. Human error is a symptom of a system that needs to be redesigned. So, Dr. Sevillian, I'm going to ask you, have you ever heard of the System Safety Design Order of Precedence?
Yes, I have.
And can you talk about that? Actually, I'll have a question. The order is, and it's also, I will note, on FAA safety team's website, number 1, design for minimum risk. Number 2, incorporate safety devices. Number 3, provide warning devices. And 4th, develop procedures and training. What is the most effective control for mitigating risk out of those 4?
Design for minimum hazard.
Design for minimum hazard. Would that include surface surveillance technology?
Yes.
Flight deck technology?
Yes.
Yep. So why not just do more procedures and hope somebody does better?
It's not a good way of looking at risk.
Because we're human. We make mistakes, right? And you should have redundancy in the system to prevent that. We make bad decisions, we make mistakes. What has human factors research taught the aviation industry over the past 40 years and FAA?
It has taught us that early development and providing human system integration in the beginning of a design is very important. And if we don't do that, we start to see the errors that develop over the time of the use of the system.
Right. So you need redundancy. You need technology that provides that backup, not necessarily redundancy, but that additional level of protection and safety. I will say, for the ASDX and ASSC, the data comes from 5 or 6 different sources. So for ASDX, it's the surface surveillance radar that's located on top of the air traffic control tower, multilateration sensors located around the airport, aircraft surveillance radars such as the Mode S, ADSB, and terminal automation system to obtain flight plan data. It looks like the new technology is really just focused on ADSB. So I do have concerns on the capability of whatever SAI that they're putting in Austin, Indianapolis, Nashville, and Dallas Love Field. It should have strong capabilities in order to prevent an incursion from becoming something significantly more catastrophic. Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk about the TCAS. We didn't talk much about that in this case. As most of us know, the TCAS is not designed to prevent a runway incursion. And the way it's designed is it's also inhibited below certain altitudes above ground levels, so it doesn't give you a command to stay away from the traffic and fly you into the ground. So right after the go-around, the aborted landing. Was there still a was there a midair concern by the controller after the go-around and the continuing takeoff? And what actions did the controller take to increase separation after the two aircraft, one did a go-around, one did a takeoff?
This may be maybe a multi-part answer.
Yeah,
I can speak to. I'll speak to the air traffic controller. In the interview with the controller, he was definitely concerned with the proximity, even after they had become airborne, and as he was learning that Southwest had become airborne, and he could not see them still. So he did issue a vector immediately to Southwest once he knew he was airborne to further diverge those two airplanes.
Okay. Did the Southwest crew follow that vector?
That would be Warren.
They turned approximately 20 to 30 degrees to the right, and they were issued a right turn. The Southwest crew wasn't real sure about the right turn, and the controller, the Southwest crew thought the controller thought they were still on the ground and had aborted their takeoff, and they told them the controller told them to turn right. So Southwest crew, being airborne, made a shallow right turn.
I agree with you. That call out for the controller was right turn off the runway, right? Because he thought they had aborted.
That's correct.
So there's confusion there. Did either aircraft receive a TCAS alert?
Yes, both aircraft actually received TCAS alerts. So for FedEx, as it was coming in, it would have gotten a TCAS alert as Southwest went in air. And then for Southwest, it would have gotten a traffic advisory roughly, I think it came down to about 6 or 7 seconds prior to Southwest doing their takeoff run, starting their takeoff run.
And did the Southwest crew respond to that TCAS?
Yes, they did. They shallowed their climb out. They went to about 5 degrees of pitch. Normally, you would have a maximum of 18 degrees of pitch on takeoff. They shallowed down to about 5 degrees of pitch to increase the rate of diversion from the FedEx airplane. The Southwest crew reported that they could see FedEx on their TCAS display, and in the interview, we asked, Dr. Sevillian asked the co-pilot if he had had any training in this area before, and the co-pilot said that when he was a T1 instructor pilot in the Air Force, that they used to do formation takeoffs in the weather, and once they got airborne, they used the TCAS to judge their distance from the airplane on top of them. So kudos to the Southwest crew for their actions on the departure.
I absolutely agree with that call. That was a good call by the Southwest crew to do that. Otherwise, we might have had the potential for a midair at that point. That's all the questions I have in this section, Chair.
Thank you. Agree. Member Chapman.
I'm glad Member Graham has raised the issue of TCAS because I do have some questions in that area. There's plenty of room for criticism, I think, here, particularly with regard to communication. But it does seem to me that the action taken by the Southwest crew in response to the TCAS alert did contribute, at least in part, to helping avoid a midair collision here. Is that correct?
I would concur with that assessment, yes.
And I know that they shallowed their climb in response to the TCAS alert. And I know that they also took a relatively shallow right turn. Was the right turn also in response to the TCAS alert, or was that somehow in response to the
that was more in the shallow right turn was more in response to the controller telling them to turn right.
Okay. And just remind us here, what are the limitations of TCAS while an aircraft like the Southwest Airlines aircraft? What are the limitations while an aircraft is on the ground, and why is it that a TCAS alert was activated only after the aircraft lifted off?
So by design, TCAS is really a tool to prevent mid-air collisions. It's not designed for preventing ground collisions. So the FAA requires, in order to get through the certification program, that the TCAS will inhibit all RAs below 1,000 feet. It will inhibit all audible alerts below 500 feet. And in addition, any intruder that it determines is on ground, it will not provide any advisories against that aircraft.
And that's for the purpose of ensuring that pilots aren't receiving all kinds of, or flight crews aren't receiving all kinds of essentially false alerts.
That's correct, yeah, to prevent nuisance alerts.
Okay, okay. On the issue of ADSB, and I think Member Inman makes a good point with regard to equipage and general aviation aircraft. I'm a little rusty on this, so help me out. But I think, though, at airports that have Part 121 air carrier service, that the airspace requirements that are associated with those airports are going to require, in most, if not all cases, that any general aviation aircraft operating there would have to have ADSB. Is that correct?
Thank you for catching that, and that is correct. So GA, if they're operating in Class A, B, or C, they do have to have ADSB out.
Now, and I don't want to suggest that this is a be-all, end-all answer, because I do think that there are still some concerns about whether ADSB alone is enough here. But at least with regard to that piece of it, whether or not all the aircraft operating at an air carrier serviced airport, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Where it would be a problem, though, is at some of the general aviation airports that are pretty darn busy. Teterboro, for example, a lot of heavy traffic there, a lot of high-end traffic, and I'm not sure that, and maybe the airspace there requires it as well. But certainly there are some busy general aviation airports where you might have a mix of aircraft, some equipped and some not. So I think that has to be taken into account, particularly if we're going to see this installed, these sorts of technologies installed more widely. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Brown.
I didn't have any more questions on this round.
Thank you. Member Inman. Okay. I have some questions on flight deck technology, but Mike went first, so I'll yield to Member Graham first and then come back. Nope, you're good? Okay. Why is it important to have both surface surveillance technology and direct pilot warning technology?
From a human factors standpoint, we want to make sure that we have extra layer of protection. Let's take a look at the air traffic control tower, for example. There's a possibility that the controller may not be looking at their service detection display. And if we have an opportunity to have the pilots look at their displays, for example, to see if there's traffic on the runway or taxiway, that's just an extra layer of protection. We want that from a human performance standpoint to ensure that we have all the systems covered in terms of being able to communicate to the pilots, communicate to the controllers.
Yeah, and thank God in this situation, the first officer was looking outside during a Cat 3 ILS landing and could see a white light in a silhouette of a Southwest plane in terrible, almost no visibility weather. But if we had direct pilot alerting or warning, that could be helpful.
Absolutely.
How long have we been recommending that?
33 years?
20? Yeah, since 2000.
24. 33, though, on surface surveillance, 24 on direct pilot alerting, so that's a long time. In the past, we've heard from FAA that the surface surveillance, that they are hampered because of resources, that they don't have enough funding, putting aside the technological capabilities. I'm not sure that direct pilot alerting would actually cost them very much other than possibly issuing an NPRM and certifying it. But speaking of certification, if there was direct pilot alerting, there would have to be some certification, and I'll point to the Transport Airplane Risk Assessment Methodology and Monitor Safety Analyze Data process, which according to the FAA is a data-driven, risk-based approach for safety assurance and safety risk management. They talk about continued operational safety and in the fleet, and this methodology and this process is used to essentially assess risk for when you're doing certification of something like direct pilot alerting. I want to understand what we think, how FAA evaluates risk in that approach.
Yeah, FAA evaluates, as you noted, the MSAD process, Monitor Safety Data Analyze, when looking at risks, that includes probability and severity. They use this system to calculate those risks and understand what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. I think the important part here is that we want to make sure that the recommendations that we have from FAA in terms of flight deck technology, that they understand what the risk of not implementing this technology on board aircraft, what that risk looks like in terms of the aircraft fleet. Because we've seen at least two, for example, runway incursions, the Austin one and the JFK, which are incidents that the FAA looks at in terms of the cost process. And so why not utilize your MSAD process to determine the probability and severity for an event like this and get that technology on board the aircraft?
Yeah, I mean, we've received comments from all sorts of federal agencies about basing cost-benefit analysis or basing certification and risk analysis on actual accidents that occurred and deaths, serious injuries that occur. It's not quite clear how they quantify an incident when it didn't result in death. And so I think this discussion with Dr. Sevillian is intended to bring out a issue that we see, that FAA has to be able to figure out how to address the risk based on what could have happened, not just based on sort of this tombstone mentality that my old boss used to call it, which is only act after the fact, after people die, and you can use that for future risk analysis, but maybe not the ones that could have happened. Correct?
That is correct.
Great. Thank you. Just checking. No other questions. Are we good to keep going? Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We are going to come back at noon. We will be back. We have a few more. We want to talk about training in low visibility operations. We want to talk about the 25-hour cockpit voice recorders. And I suspect we have a lot of issues in the catch-all round that we might want to bring out that are part of our investigation as well. So we will be back at noon. Thank you. The board will now discuss the third safety issue, training on the Surface Movement Guidance and Control System Plan, or SMIGS plan, and low visibility operations. We'll start with Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. The SMIGS system plan is a voluntary but encouraged plan for Part 139 certificated airports authorized to conduct operations when visibility is less than 1,200 feet. Generally speaking, how does the activation of the SMIGS plan improve safety at airports in low visibility conditions?
In general, the SMIGS plan clearly defines and standardizes the roles and responsibilities or duties and responsibilities of the applicable stakeholders to the plan. And then it also employs some additional procedures like visual aids, certain lighting systems, or maybe the configuration of the lighting, taxi routes or taxi instructions. And it provides an enhanced awareness to both sides. So it provides enhanced awareness both to the flight crews as well as to air traffic control. And provides a more consistent expectation as well about what to expect during those low visibility conditions.
Thank you for that. So the plan is intended to be activated when the RVR is below 1,200 feet. On the morning of the near miss, the touchdown RVR values, the midpoint, and the rollout RVR values fluctuated from below 1,200 threshold to slightly above the 1,200-foot threshold. Does the AC, as I guess it's the advisory circular in this case, provide guidance whether or not the RVR must be consistently below 1,200 foot before activation of the SMIGS plan?
It doesn't. It basically, it states outright that it is for any time the RVR values are below 1,200 feet. And so, for instance, in the Austin case specifically, that was one of the things that was brought up, was there was some ambiguous language there. But in the Austin case, they immediately trained after this to ensure that controllers knew and understood with clarifying training that anytime an RVR value drops below 1,200 feet, thou shalt enter SMIGS.
And as we know, especially with fog, that it is changing quite often.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the RVR for the FedEx, when they were cleared to land, it had changed by the time they cleared the Southwest to take off. So who is responsible for activating the SMIGS plan at Austin?
On that morning, it would have been the operations supervisor.
Operations supervisor. What was the controller's familiarity with the SMIGS plan?
The local controller had no familiarity really beyond the existence of the plan. He knew there was a plan. He could not speak to any of the details of the plan whatsoever.
That was a local controller. Okay. Did the local controller, did we find out if he had received any initial or recurrent training on the SMIGS plan?
We could find no evidence that he had been provided training on the SMIGS plan, either initial or subsequent to that. He recalled in his interview, he stated to us that he thought he recalled getting it probably when he was going through certification, but he couldn't recall anything about it or anything else. When we dug into the training records, the only evidence we could find related to SMIGS was 2 slides that were the taxi routes utilized during SMIGS that were in the tower ground control and local control initial training PowerPoint. But and we don't know that, no confirmation that that was done.
Okay, just 2 slides, okay. Is there a requirement for the FAA to provide initial and or recurrent training on the SMIGS system plan?
There's no requirement for recurrent training from an FAA standpoint. However, anybody with a SMIGS plan, there is a requirement for them to brief all stakeholders on the initial plan as well as any changes to that plan when changes are made.
Okay. There's a section 3.7 of the SMIGS plan provide about position reporting when taxiing aircraft when they're not visible from the tower. What does that section really talk about? What are they asking for?
So the section actually states in there that the airport does not currently have an airport surface detection equipment, and air traffic control utilizes position reporting when taxiing aircraft that are not visible from the tower. So that's giving air traffic control the providing air traffic control the guidance that that's what is expected to be used, and it provides pilots and other stakeholders there the expectation and awareness that they can expect that to be utilized.
Okay. One last quick one here. If the SMIGS had been activated and followed the morning of the near miss, would the departure or taxi route of the incident flights have been different?
Yes, absolutely would have been different. In the Austin SMIGS plan, once they enter SMIGS, at the time of this incident, once they enter SMIGS, it required all aircraft operations to be to 18 left.
18 left, and I think there were about, 3 18 right departures or something like that, if I remember right?
There were a few. I don't know the exact number without going back.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. So runway visual range values or RVR values, how are those RVR values measured and recorded, and how often?
So the RVR values, and if you wanted technical specifics on that, Don, our meteorologist Don, I could speak a little more to that, but they are equipment derived. They are not personnel derived. And essentially what an RVR is giving is it's the value or the distance that the pilot could see the runway lights down the runway. So essentially if it says RVR 600, then that's saying that the pilot should be able to see the runway lights at least 600 feet ahead of them while sitting on the deck.
Are these measured by AWOS or ASOS or whatever the?
No, it is a separate piece of equipment. I know Don Ike knows the name of it.
It's with a transmissometer, almost like the same observation tool that the ASOS uses. Okay. It's basically measuring a sphere like this and giving you that in hundreds of feet.
Okay, thank you. And maybe you said this already. How often are those measurements?
They're done every 45 seconds, updated typically 1-minute readings. And on weather reports, you get a 10-minute average, low and a high. The controllers have the 40-second reading, or we just generally say a 1-minute reading on the display in the tower cab.
Okay, and those are reported to the controller, and the controller shares those with flight crews as they're communicating, right?
That is correct.
Okay. The SMIGS, it's a voluntary program for Part 139 certified airports. Are there minimum standards or requirements for participating in the program?
I'm not certain on that. I wouldn't be able to speak to that.
Okay, that's fair. And do we have any idea how many airports currently participate and have SMIGS plans, even a ballpark?
We don't. We did ask that question. We are still waiting on an answer.
Right.
Hadn't received it yet.
Yeah, I knew you were reaching out to FAA on that. I'd be interested in that, by the way, just as a follow-up. If you get a chance, if we hear back from FAA. In airports without surface detection technologies nor SMIGS plans, are there, what sorts of mitigation measures are used by controllers in low visibility conditions to ensure safety?
That would be based on whatever initial training they were provided or training at their own facility that may be included by either directed by the facility or various courses that might come down, but there's not a program necessarily that outlines that.
But those would be the sorts of conditions where it would be particularly important for calling out positions or requiring aircraft to call out positions and those sorts of steps, correct?
Absolutely.
Are there, I think the answer to this is pretty clearly yes. Is there a heightened risk of runway incursion under those sorts of conditions? I think obviously yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Can you explain the letter of agreement between air traffic control and the Austin airport?
So the letter of agreement is essentially what establishes the agreed upon duties and responsibilities that each party will take in the course of executing the SMIGS plan and when it goes active at the facility. So in the case of the SMIGS plan, it's actually owned or maintained by the airport authority. In this case, the one I mentioned earlier, which was the City of Austin Department of Aviation. So they update the plan, they keep it together, they have the meetings with the stakeholders, all of that type of thing. The letter of agreement is essentially takes that SMIGS plan, breaks down the duties clearly so that there's clearly defined roles and responsibilities on both parts, and they essentially agree to that's how they will conduct operations during SMIGS.
And would you say they follow that agreement, that they're clearly defined roles and responsibilities?
Well, we did find differences in the language in there. I'm not sure what you're asking, but we did find language that wasn't completely aligned, and we that's in our recommendations.
Thank you. I'd like to have you speak more about what aspects of the low visibility training would improve departure safety.
So specifically, low visibility affects any control tower at any time, or it could affect any control tower at any time. And low visibility training would just, it provides a it would provide an enhanced awareness on the part of the controller of the various things that come into play when you have low visibility conditions. Aircraft move slower, aircraft need more time, aircraft do things a little differently. Position reporting is very important if you're one of those airports that does not have surface detection capability. And so by providing this type of training, which there was no indication that there was at Austin, controllers are then better prepared to handle traffic like on the morning of this incident there. So it's really like any training, it's a tool to essentially ensure that we are providing all of the tools and resources to those that are operating to operate the safest that they can.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Member Inman.
Thank you. So pilots have very strict training requirements to maintain currency, and they're tracked everywhere. What reoccurring training is required by the FAA for the controllers, not just for low visibility?
So recurrent training, I couldn't sit here and speak them all out. They're outlined in a national, or actually in the FAA's. I have an order here. I can look it up and actually give you.
You don't have to go through all of them.
No.
Just a general approach.
The FAA order JO 3120.4, which is air traffic control technical training, it outlines in detail the training requirements for air traffic controllers in all aspects of training, to include recurrent and refresher training and how that is should be conducted at facilities. So in recurrent training, there are specific trainings that must occur with all air traffic controllers based on facility and that type of thing. Refresher training is a little bit different in that there are a certain amount of topics that are listed, and they can essentially select at least a certain number of those. I can't remember what it is, like 3 or 4 or whatever, based on their scenario and need at that facility. However, in refresher, facilities are also encouraged to add their own refresher training applicable to their operation and system.
Okay.
But
so on this controller, you stated that they had not had low visibility training during the past year. Can you speak to the training record overall? Completed all other requirements, any training issues in the past? I remember in the docket, the record was like 1,800 pages.
A lot of pages, right?
I don't know if it's much information or facts, but a lot of pages.
It is. So in air traffic control training, there's a lot of types of training. So we have refresher training, we have recurrent training, we have on-the-job training, we have mandatory briefing items that they might be utilizing. There's a lot of different types, and all of those are documented at some point or another. During our on-site at Austin, the documentation of training showed a lot of missing training, meaning had not been documented as complete by the controller, but not just by the controller, the low controller here, but other controllers within the facility. And since that time, the facility has provided us updated and corrected information and indicated that indeed the controller did have all of his training complete, and it just was not documented appropriately in the facility because of their staffing in the staff support realm, meaning in management. The air traffic manager was filling 3 management roles that would normally be filled by 3 different people, and they had allowed that to fall behind. So,
okay. A few minutes ago or earlier, it was discussed low visibility operations can occur and do occur everywhere in the country. Is that correct?
I would say that, and maybe Don Ike would be a better person to answer that, but I would say any air traffic control facility across the country or air control tower could be subject to low visibility conditions.
Okay. And so to follow up that, is low visibility controlling probably one of the most difficult things that a controller could face?
I would not say that.
Okay.
I would say that it's definitely one of the top challenges they face. Okay. Yes.
But yet we're learning that one of the top challenges that can affect every controller almost in the United States, it's not a requirement to have that training?
Every tower controller, that's correct. And yes, we could not find any evidence of any required training specifically related to low visibility operations there. Now, that's not to say that there's not facilities out there conducting training on low visibility operations that have taken steps to go ahead and have that training to provide their controllers. There are, okay? Exactly how many we don't know, but we don't see any mandated training in that realm.
Okay. I'm going to wait for a couple more questions in the next round.
Thank you. Member Graham?
Thank you, Chair. I just got one more question containing about the SMIGs. Understanding that the activation of the SMIGs is intended to improve safety at airports when RVR values are below 1,200 feet. And at the time of the near miss, the RVR values at Austin were below 1,200 feet. Despite all this and a thorough investigation, the staff believes that the failure to activate the SMIGs plan was not causal to the near miss. Can staff please explain why?
Yes, sir. We just felt that there were way too many variables that could not be clearly identified as had this happened, this would not have. Had this happened, this would have happened. And because of all those variables, is almost no way to know definitively if things would have been differently had SMIGs been activated. So, but what we did know is that there were clear and concise procedural requirements on the part of air traffic control to move aircraft safely, regardless of the weather conditions at the time, and the controller was aware of those separation standards.
Great. Thank you for that answer. That's
Yes.
all I have in this round.
Member Inman?
My apologies. Brian, you're not off the hook just yet. So I was lucky enough to be at the Department of Transportation whenever the pilot record database was finalized, 2021. I believe it came out of a recommendation that the NTSB made from the Colgan crash, which we're very lucky not to be having a similar filled room with victims. Is there any type of system for air traffic controllers to have a similar record or a database where we hold these pilots to one standard, but we're not the controllers?
I am not aware of a system like that. For us to access controller training records, we request that information from the FAA, and they will provide it. They always do provide us that information. We don't have access to the database similar to, I think, they may be able to with pilots. And the FAA does have different programs they utilize to track training across the FAA. There's like Team, I think, is the new one, if I'm not mistaken. Cedar was out there, and we have them operating on a couple of different systems, and they have the manual training records themselves that they still keep, which is a manual jacket that's 1,800 pages of stuff that you've seen.
But not always updated or completely accurate.
Correct. It's not uncommon for trainings to be updated in batches, meaning, they might go 3-4 months and then go in and update all of everybody's training records with all of the training that was accomplished over those 3 or 4 months.
So they'll turn off my computer at 5 p.m. if I haven't completed a training, but in other governments, it's okay? Sorry, that was the hypothetical.
No, yeah, I think they have some government requirements too. So,
fair enough. Okay, sorry. So this actually came up in our courtesy meetings, and I think it was helpful to talk about that the FAA has had a ride-along program that allowed controllers to jump seat in the cockpit. And is that program still in place? And do you think it's a good safety program to allow for them to understand the challenges in cockpits?
So it is still in place, and I can speak from experience that say it's absolutely a valuable program. I would even take it a step further. I mean, this is just Brian Soper, but I feel that it should be required for air traffic controllers to fly in a flight deck as part of their orientation training at some point in their career. But that being said, the program does still exist. Unfortunately, there are a lot of restrictions and requirements to participating in that program, different from what it was in earlier days, that has made it too arduous at this point for many controllers to consider doing. And not just the arduousness of the restrictions, but with current staffing levels at a lot of air traffic control facilities where they're at minimum or on mandatory overtime and things like that, taking their one off day to go jump on a round trip plane that has to go and come back same day and all these things is not enticing to them.
And so if they do that, you say they have to take a day off? Does that mean they have to do it on their personal, or are you aware of that?
I can't speak to that directly right now, but I mean, I think that I would just say that, well, yeah, I couldn't speak to that directly.
That's okay. So with the massive waves of new controllers that are being hired, would it be a good safety practice for the FAA, and I'm not trying to find a recommendation here, but would it be a good safety practice for them to consider integrating those newer controllers into the cockpit to have a better understanding?
From my experience, absolutely. In the Navy, I was at more than one facility where it was a requirement to fly on the local C-12 or P-3 platform or whatever that we were stationed at there as part of our controller orientation training when you got there. It was a requirement to sign off where you had to do it, and then you had to come back and talk about what you observed and provide that input to the rest of the control staff as well.
And so I'm going to make a little converse question in that regard. Is there any such program that allows pilots to see what goes on in the cab, that how they're having to move through so many different mechanisms and the challenges they face?
That's a great question. So from I can speak from the air traffic control facility standpoint, and Captain Abrams might want to even tack on from his knowledge, but not a formalized program. However, in air traffic control, we call it outreach, essentially. So outreach with local operators and pilots, and we encourage that heavily. Some facilities are better than others with regard to how much they're able to do, but we absolutely encourage workload permitting and traffic permitting to bring pilots into the control environment so they can see our side of things and meet with them afterwards and discuss what it is they observe and see. Some places it's going really well and a lot of people take advantage of it. Others it's a little more challenging and they're not able to do it as much, but it's not a formalized program per se, but is absolutely available and encouraged.
My apologies, Cap. Mr. Soper gave you 3 seconds.
That's okay. The pilots may or may not participate, and what I mean by that is there would be a high level group that would want to participate, and there would be other groups that would enjoy their day off and not participate. So it'd be a mixed bag.
But would it be a helpful safety item for them to consider?
Most definitely.
Okay.
How does having one person in a tower versus maybe 2 or more, this obviously was 2, but how does that impact safety and perhaps the ability to train people?
Well, certainly if you only have one person, there's very limited times when there is only one person in a tower currently, and that would normally be on a midnight shift configuration at airports that reduce down and don't have higher levels of traffic. So they might reduce down to 2 in the facility with 1 in the tower at one time, with 1 being able to be on break. The 1 in the tower, the thing that always makes that concerning or challenge is if you're the only person in the tower and you have a medical event, what happens? Mm-hmm. If you don't have a second set of eyes, you don't have a second set of ears, you don't have there's really no crew resource management because you're a crew of 1. So essentially, you're responsible to maintain that vigilance across the board on everything. So is it routine to happen? Yes. Is it a safety challenge? It's definitely something that has to be mitigated anytime it's being done.
So staying on training, I read in your report that the facility was equipped with a suitcase-style, portable with small monitors and limited capabilities tower simulator system. However, all ATC staff interviewed stated the simulator's limited capabilities and intermittent performance was not adequate to conduct meaningful simulations. They also stated that they had never actually used the simulator themselves. What did they use before this suitcase-style simulator?
So prior to receiving the suitcase-style simulator, they were utilizing San Antonio's TSS, which has a full-blown simulator and has the Austin area and scenarios plugged into it. So they would utilize their simulator, which required them to travel to utilize it. Mm-hmm. Anytime you have to travel, it isn't just the money, it's a staffing issue to be able to get people out and be able to get them there. But that was certainly a much better simulation. The suitcase simulators are very limited. They provide some level of assistance, but mostly in the developmental stage, I would say, for basic things, basic vectoring, traffic advisories, things like that. But they're not robust like a full TSS with the ability to really input good weather and higher level traffic scenarios.
Yeah, so it said the air traffic manager said he did not feel the portable TSS was a valuable training tool for staff there, and they didn't use it. What do they have now that they had a runway incursion? Or what will they be getting?
Now they're getting a full TSS. It's a beauty.
Amazing what happens after a potential incursion. Perhaps, what do we always ask air carriers to do? We always ask them to be proactive about safety. Look at your risk, figure out how to address it, monitor it, reevaluate it constantly. We should do the same at FAA. Member Graham? No more? Okay, we are going to move on to issue number 4, the need for 25-hour cockpit voice recorders, starting with Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Both of the incident aircraft were equipped with flight data recorders, so I'm not going to talk about CVRs initially. I think we got about 27 hours of data off the Southwest aircraft and 57 hours off the FedEx airplane. How critical was the data from the flight data recorders in the investigation of this accident?
Sure. So the flight data recorders from both of these airplanes was very critical. Provided timing of the Southwest airplane advancing the engine throttle to perform the run-up procedure on the runway. It also provided timing that the throttles were advanced for the go-around of the FedEx airplane. And additionally, we used the flight data recorder data and the TCAS simulation to see what the Southwest airplane TCAS unit would have put out.
Do you also use the data and match it, try to match it with the ADSB out data? Did we receive any of that in this case from the FAA?
Yeah, I think Marie Moeller could speak to the ADSB data in this.
So the ADSB data that we did receive, yes, we use it to match up with the FDR data. Usually the pressure altitude in the ADSB data was broadcast by the airplane, so it matches what is recorded on the flight data recorder, and you can use those to confirm all of your timing.
Excellent. Despite both the Southwest and the FedEx airplanes being equipped with the CVR, they were both overwritten in this case. I know you talked about it. Is there any preserve a CVR to prevent it from being overwritten?
There is no requirement, no. We actually have a lot of history on this item. Back in 2002, when the recorder mandated duration was only 30 minutes, we issued a safety recommendation letter to the FAA to say that this was a large problem for us, that these recorders kept getting overwritten, and that flight crews weren't adequately removing power from the CVRs once the event had occurred. In response to that, the FAA issued a notice to all operators saying that they should include removing power from the CVR via the circuit breaker on a checklist. However, the issue still persists. As I noted in my presentation, since 2018, there's been 18 events where CVRs have been overwritten, at least 18. And so it's by recommending that we move to 25-hour voice recorders, we're removing the human element of going to actually pull the circuit breaker in that instance. So.
Sounds like a good idea to me. Can staff please discuss the general investigative value to CVR data in aviation investigations?
Yeah, sure. So CVRs are extremely valuable for accident investigations. They provide very unique information like flight crew intentions and coordination. They provide information on workload, fatigue, situational awareness, stuff like that.
In the case of this incident, what would this CVR have done for us in the investigation of this particular incident?
Sure. So specifically in this incident, we did not have the exact timing of when the FedEx crew called out for the go-around. So we used the flight data recorder advancing the throttles for that timing. So that would have, as we noted in the animation, would have been critical information that we do not have because it was overwritten.
Great. Thank you for that. I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you, Member Chapman.
Thank you. Are recorder manufacturers currently producing 25-hour cockpit voice recorders?
Yes. So all of the major recorder manufacturers, at least here in the United States, have a 25-hour model in production.
And even though FAA doesn't currently mandate 25-hour CVRs, are any aircraft in the U.S. equipped with 25-hour CVRs?
Yes, many newly manufactured airplanes in the United States are already equipped with 25-hour CVRs. In fact, our lab has received a few 25-hour CVRs from U.S. registered airplanes that were involved in incidents here in the United States.
Do we have any sense of how many might be in the fleet today that have 25-hour CVR?
I can't speak to a specific number,
sure,
no.
Sure. Is there a mandate for 25-hour CVRs in Europe?
Yes, so the European regulator EASA has had a mandate for 25-hour CVRs for newly manufactured airplanes since January 1st, 2022.
So 2 years, essentially,
yes.
At this point. And Is that only for newly manufactured, or is there a retrofit requirement in Europe?
Correct. Only newly manufactured. There is no retrofit requirement in Europe.
In its December 2023 NPRM regarding 25-hour CVRs, FAA did not propose a requirement to retrofit the existing fleet of aircraft. Why not? And what is our position on retrofitting the existing fleet?
Sure. So in the NPRM, the FAA stated that the cost to operators would be significant. As I stated in my presentation, in our response to the NPRM, we think that the FAA overestimated the number of airplanes that were applicable to our recommendation, which increased the projected cost for the retrofit of the fleet.
And we now have and I think you covered this in your presentation, we now have a legislative mandate. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's a legislative mandate for Part 121 operators here in the United States to retrofit their fleet within 6 years.
So both newly manufactured and the existing fleet would be required to be equipped within 6 years ultimately?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brown.
Well, I guess Member Graham and Chapman covered a couple of my questions, but I would expand on the question. The next question I had was, would it be difficult for the operators to replace the 2-hour cockpit voice recorder with one of the that could record 25 hours? Would it be difficult for the operator?
Sure, that's a great question. They should not be, because the 25-hour voice recorders are very similar in form, fit, and function to the 2-hour counterparts.
Okay. What are some of the challenges we've heard doing so, dealing with this issue?
I have not heard of any challenges of retrofitting or inputting 25-hour CVRs onto the fleet.
All right. Thank you.
Member Inman.
So I'm old enough to remember what an 8-track was, then a cassette tape, and then a Walkman, and a lot of other things. And obviously that technology has evolved. And so now a lot of memory and storage is removable or is actually getting much smaller. Will you talk for a moment about, whenever you say changing out, is that removing an entire CVR system, putting in an entire new one? Is it a change? Is it swapping out a chip?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as of now, there is no modification option available to the existing units, so it would be installing a new unit that has a 25-hour memory into the airplane.
Do you believe the industry will find a way to modify?
I can't speak for industry, but I think there could be a possibility that
sounds like a good business opportunity for somebody, right?
Yeah, it does.
When swapping these out, I think one of the discussions were during normal maintenance times, because downtime is costly for airlines. Do we estimate, or do we know how long it takes to swap these out?
I cannot speak to the retrofit. That would be something the manufacturers could come up with, but it shouldn't take that long. It's a very small piece of equipment.
Okay, and I apologize, I don't want to put you on the spot because everything could be different, but are we talking about $1 million to change this out? 500,000, 50,000, just a general range of what it would cost to swap one with another?
Sure. So, for example, in the FAA's NPRM, the cost estimate they used was the cost of the actual unit itself, which they used as an average of $25,000 per unit.
So the difference in $25,000 for an airliner, where in Cap, one easy question: do you know how much a gallon of fuel that a plane burns dollar-wise?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Sorry?
I cannot answer that.
Okay. Just trying to draw the correlation. I'm sure somebody can. It seems like a very minimal investment in order for a lot of productive data and information to make things safer. That's all I've got.
All right. Thank you. When we do our investigations, when it comes down to evaluating the CVR and there is a readout, are parties present for that?
Parties are not typically present for the readout process, no.
Do they look at the transcript?
Yeah, parties have access to the transcript. In addition, if we form a CVR group, someone from each party will be on that CVR group.
And any sort of discussion of what, might need to be further clarified in the CVR, if there are sounds, you listen to it.
That is correct, yes.
If you're an operator and you're a party to the NTSB investigation, what advantage would the CVR provide for you as an operator? And then the point I'm getting at is it's not just an advantage for investigations and for conducting and completing our investigations. What safety advantage does it provide to other parties of our investigations, such as an operator or flight crews?
In terms specifically of an accident or just in general?
Both, safety-wise.
Yeah, sure. So following the Colgan Air accident in 2009, the NTSB previously recommended that operators should use all available safety information to them to evaluate their flight crew's performance and enhance safety, and that could include cockpit voice recorder audio.
Right. You could take immediate action, and you would know what action specifically to take when you had that information from the CVR. Without it, it's a little limiting to the operators and others, but with it, you have more information, and that's the point I'm getting at. Because we always hear when we talk about CVRs, whether it's from FAA or from others, that we just want it for our investigations. It's not just valuable for us. It's valuable for operators and everybody else who might be involved in any sort of accident or incident to provide immediate information and safety information and to enable them to improve safety without having to wait to the end of our investigation, and to be very specific about what that is. Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to investigative value of the CVR, what is the safety value of the CVR data to an operator?
So similar to what I was just discussing with the chair, the safety value to the operator would, we've had previous recommendations that the operators could use CVR data in kind of like a FOQA program type situation.
Absolutely. Just like ASAP and FOQA with the same punitive protections for the crew. Yet that was, I believe it was, came out of Colgan Air, 2010 recommendation, and we closed it unacceptable. I would think maybe now that we have a 25-hour CVR rule out there by the FAA, we might want to maybe revisit that recommendation with some of the accidents we have that have happened recently that we do have CVR data on. When the NTSB obtains a CVR during the course of an investigation of an accident or incident, what protections are in place to protect the confidentiality and publication of the CVR data?
Sure. So the NTSB is prohibited by federal statute from releasing the actual CVR audio, which is why we produce written transcripts. Additionally, on top of that, we have internal policies and procedures in place to make sure that only qualified staff assigned to the accident have access to the recordings. Everyone who listens to them has to sign an audition log. Anyone that comes and joins the CVR group as a party member has to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So the protections are very robust.
Has the NTSB ever leaked a CVR recording?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Finally, I just got to applaud Congress for finally incorporating the 25-hour CVR in the recently passed FAA Reauthorization Act. And I really encourage FAA to act expeditiously to meet the deadlines imposed by Congress. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. Member Chapman? No more questions. Member Brown? Member Inman? None for me either. So we're going to go to our final round, which is really the catch-all round. These are issues we might want to revisit that we previously discussed or issues that we haven't discussed so far. So we'll start with Member Graham. All right, Member Chapman.
I do have just one question, and it's really a clarifying question. The overview description of what FAA calls its Airports Runway Incursion Mitigation Program indicates that airfield geometry is a primary contributing factor for runway incursions. In this case, we did not find that airfield geometry was a factor. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Thanks, Chair.
Member Brown? Member Inman?
So I know during the break earlier I'd asked a question, Mr. Soper, about specifically this ride-along program. I might have an update on it?
Yes, I apologize. As a matter of fact, thank you to my colleagues who got me some information while we were sitting there. And so while this program is still a program on the books with the FAA, it is currently not an active program. So controllers are unable to utilize it at this point in time right now. And that's been that way pretty much since coming out of COVID. So I wanted to pass that along and also we talked about the limitations about when they had to do it. And it's actually required when it is active, according to the program restrictions that are there, it must be done during duty hours. That's one of the restrictions that makes it difficult, meaning they have to accomplish this flight during a normal duty day.
Whenever they're already having to work 6 days with overtime?
Correct. So it would be on a normal duty day, which also is very difficult for those to get out of a duty day to go fly, right?
Thank you. And I hope you'll indulge me with this kind of more general question. As this is Member Brown and I's first time, the one way we learned was watching some of these videos of these hearings. And I think it's important to say, while this incident was is an important issue, we found that. I'm going to ask Mr. LeBaron, with aviation safety, how many current active investigations do you have open?
Well, I don't have an exact number, but I will tell you we do roughly 1,300 a year, so I would say we're north of 1,000 at the present.
At the very moment, right now?
Correct.
And Mr. Curtis, overall, just investigations that we have ongoing?
As of today, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300 active and ongoing. As Mr. LeBaron said, we intake around 1,400 plus per year. But so it's very dynamic to keep those moving and maintain the quality, timeliness, and accuracy. But at the same time, we launch to a high percentage of those accidents to go on scene and collect documentation, conduct interviews, and examine wreckage. So it's very dynamic.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's about 17 staff sitting in the audience right now to answer questions. This is not the only thing going on today, nor will it be this afternoon. There's a lot of 450 workforce that are doing all this every day, trying to make everything safer, and I think they should be applauded, because I know a lot of your colleagues, as you said, Mr. Soper, help you out, backfill. They're having to take care of the job as we prepared for this. So while this board meeting is important, the everyday work that those rank and file people do out in the field, I think, are just as critically important. That's it, Chair.
Thank you very much. I do have some questions for Mr. Ike. Can you talk a little bit about some of what we looked at with the weather situation and some known issues in Austin?
Well, one of the key factors we found in Austin was that there is a contract weather observer station which provides backup for rapidly changing weather conditions. The biggest factor in there is his location, where his office is, did not allow him to provide any weather monitoring of the current conditions. So he could not see outside conditions. He had no computer or any weather access other than his monitor. But due to the professionalism, they were out making special reports, reporting the conditions adequately, that it did not impact the safety of this flight. However, rapidly changing thunderstorms, dense fog scenarios. These are severe weather scenarios that rapid determination, monitoring, progress, reporting of the conditions are extremely important. In this case, they did a fantastic job, but in the future that may not be so lucky.
And what room, can you sort of describe what room they're currently in?
They're in the second floor of the tower in an old smoking lounge that the controllers used. Once smoking was barred, they moved them out, and I believe about 2 years ago, they moved the contract weather observers into that office due to lack of facilities at the airport.
And does the room have a window?
It does not.
No window for the contract weathers.
They cannot look out the window. They cannot access a computer. They have to go outside to use their cell phone.
Yep, because they don't have internet service.
Correct.
No internet service.
Correct.
No window. has to use their personal cell phone to go outside. Or to get weather radar information, or to access other National Weather Service related products. Connectivity, they said, is intermittent even when they are outside. And the only equipment located in their office was an ASOS monitor.
Correct.
They didn't have access to the internet to monitor all of that, but they were provided a computer by the FAA to access the FAA intranet. However, why couldn't they log on to that?
They didn't have a password or an FAA.
They didn't have a password.
Correct.
Yep, but they had been asking for a password for quite some time, correct?
Correct.
So they had been asking for a password that they didn't get, which didn't allow them to access the intranet. So they didn't have intranet. They didn't have internet service at all. They don't have a window. They have to go outside.
And to put it further, they didn't have a good working relationship with the air traffic controller.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
I believe Brian Soper may be able to fill that part in more, but basically they weren't welcome to go up to the tower. The gateway around the top of the tower to go outside, they were barred from using. They were never really asked for any specific information. One of the things we did even notice that there's a requirement for a weather observer to issue specials at certain periods of time, changing visibilities, thunderstorm beginning, ending, increasing in intensity, snow, freezing, fog, things of this nature. There's also a requirement to issue a special if there's an aircraft mishap, which this case would have been required of a special being issued. That should be an immediate notification from the controller to the weather office. No communication existed. So basically they're sitting there. They didn't find out about the event until later in the afternoon when it hit the news.
You want to add to that, Brian?
That is correct. They're completely underutilized, or I should say not utilized. They ask them for no assistance. The only time they call weather, according to everything that was stated there, was when they needed the ASOS fixed. When the ASOS display wasn't working up there, hey, weather, what's going on? Let's fix it. That was kind of the gist of the only interaction they ever had. As he mentioned, they were kind of banned from the order. They don't call them for support. They don't do post-accident or incident. Ask them for the specials. They just, there's nothing. There's no relationship there.
Okay, thanks. I've run out of time. So Member Graham? Okay. Member Chapman? Member Brown? No, go.
So, just to clarify, this is a contract that the FAA, which has a financial burdens because they can't hire enough controllers, has contracted with for weather service, correct?
The
weather. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the weather has been reduced down. It used to, we had weather stations at many, many airports, right? And then there was, through that reduction, they've split it up. And Don can speak clearly to the contract weather observers, which are contracted by the FAA to provide this service to these certain air traffic control facilities. Many of the air traffic control facilities have shifted to what they call a LARS program, which is essentially air traffic controllers are responsible to do weather observations at those facilities. This one had a contract weather office open 24 hours a day with fully staffed.
And that shouldn't be confused with a contract tower that it may be utilized in some places, right?
Correct.
But the contract paid for 6 additional staff, if I'm correct, to monitor this weather?
Well, they
didn't have the internet?
The weather office is 24/7, and they do have a staff of 6 people working around the clock. We are looking at this very carefully because we do believe it is an item definitely important for our safety. But we're also concerned that if we ping on this too much, the FAA can correct the scenario by making it a limited aviation weather reporting station or a LARS site, require the controller to take a week of training and become an observer, and they have the responsibility. And so our concern is that if until we correct the scenario and see how big of a problem this is, the FAA can correct the issue by making Lauer's observing station get rid of the 6 weather observers, but that would deteriorate the quality and of the weather observing capability at the airport and potentially impact some safety down the line.
Understood. I guess sometimes be careful what you ask for.
It's a catch-22, but it is something that we're watching. We do plan to issue some safety recommendations on it separately from this case, but it was a significant item that we did determine in this investigation.
And let me just draw something out, I think, for some people that may not be in aviation to understand why weather would be important. The Southwest, if I'm correct, the Southwest plane that had to do the engine run-up was because of the temperature change, which was about from -1 degree, from -3. That's what required the engine run-up, which caused their delay before taking off?
Correct. It's based on temperature, and fog is fog occurs in Austin about 20 to 25 days a year with dense fog. That's actually a high amount of time. The only close airport I would say that has a higher in the south would probably be Atlanta. It has maybe Houston, and Houston also a little higher, but dense fog is very common along the Gulf Coast and does cause a lot of aviation as well as marine accidents down there due to visibility. So it does actually have a high frequency of fog.
As I understand it, the ATC supervisor would sometimes need to go out and try to correct, in the past, correct the temperature readings because of where the sensors were placed in a bowl?
The ASOS, or the Automated Surface Observation System, that reports the basic weather conditions at the airport, it's placed on the southwest side of the airport in the lowest area away from the main runway, and it has a low temperature bias. So it reports, there has been documented up to 17 degrees colder than the city, just because of the location in the river valley there compared to the ramp area.
And that is critical for de-icing operations and anything else that we've seen multiple recommendations on in the past?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions over here? Any other questions? All right. No further questions. Everyone can breathe. Mr. Curtis, will you please read the proposed findings?
Certainly, Chair. As a result of this investigation, staff proposes 18 findings. Number 1, none of the following were factors in this incident. 1, pilot and controller qualifications. 2, controller fatigue. 3, air traffic control tower staffing at the time of the incident. And 4, flight crew fatigue. Number 2, the controller's inaccurate mental model of the Southwest Airlines SWA airplane's position on the taxiway resulted from his 1, expectation that the SWA airplane would be at the hold short line for runway 18L when the flight crew requested takeoff clearance, and 2, failure to verify the SWA airplane's position on the taxiway at the time of the takeoff clearance request. Number 3, the controller's lack of training in low visibility conditions and his expectation that the Southwest Airlines SWA airplane would depart quickly were factors that led to his inaccurate mental model of the SWA airplane's position on the taxiway. Number 4, the controller's failure to fully understand the Southwest Airlines SWA airplane's position upon entering and while on the runway resulted in insufficient separation between the SWA and Federal Express airplanes. Number 5, the controller's incorrect assumption that the Southwest Airlines airplane would depart before the Federal Express airplane would arrive set up a hazardous situation that could have resulted in an accident. This situation could have been avoided altogether if the controller had followed established air traffic control procedures to ensure proper separation. Number 6, the controller could still have appropriately separated both airplanes if he had either 1, held the departing Southwest Airlines SWA airplane until after the arriving Federal Express FedEx airplane landed, or 2, if the SWA airplane had already received its takeoff clearance, canceling the clearance and instructed the FedEx airplane to go around. Number 7, the quick reaction of the Federal Express FedEx first officer after seeing the Southwest Airlines SWA airplane, and the quick response of the FedEx captain in performing a missed approach avoided a potential runway collision between the SWA and FedEx airplanes and led to the successful resolution of the loss of separation. Number 8, the Southwest Airlines flight crew's actions to shallow the airplane's climb in response to an advisory from the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System contributed to the increased separation between the two airplanes. Number 9, if surface detection equipment had been installed in the air traffic control tower, the system would have allowed the controller to track the position of the Southwest Airlines SWA airplane while it was on the taxiway and runway, which would have provided an opportunity for the controller to detect the insufficient separation between the SWA and Federal Express airplanes and take action to mitigate the situation. Number 10, the implementation of a flight deck alerting system on air carrier aircraft would further improve safety at 1, airports without surface detection equipment, and 2, airports with surface detection equipment if a controller were to inadequately respond to an alert in the tower. Number 11, even though the Southwest Airlines flight crew members were not required to inform the controller about their plan to stop the airplane once on the active runway, it would have been prudent for them to do so, given that they were notified about traffic on short final approach. Number 12, the Southwest Airlines flight crew members might have informed the controller of their plan to perform an engine run-up if they had known that the controller could not see the airplane from the tower. Number 13, to avoid potential conflicts, it is critical for 1, controllers to consider, when providing takeoff clearance to an aircraft, whether ambient conditions might affect the timing of the takeoff roll, and 2, pilots to concisely communicate pertinent aircraft position information during low visibility conditions that might prevent a controller from seeing the aircraft. Number 14, although the visibility before and at the time of the incident required the activation of the airport's surface movement guidance and control system plan, the operations supervisor's failure to implement the plan was not a factor in this incident because the local controller should have been able to appropriately manage the Southwest Airlines airplane's departure using other air traffic control procedures. Number 15, it is important for a surface movement guidance and control system plan and the related letter of agreement, LOA, to have aligned information given that controllers are required to comply with the provisions of all LOAs. Number 16, controllers need to be sufficiently trained on their airport surface movement guidance and control system plan so that they are able to effectively implement it when necessary. Number 17, refresher training on low visibility operations would benefit air traffic control tower personnel at all operating towers in the national airspace system because such conditions can affect operations throughout the United States. And number 18, cockpit voice recorders, CVR, with a 25-hour recording capability are necessary because valuable information continues to be overwritten on CVRs that is designed to record only 2 hours of audio data. Chair.
Thank you very much for reading the proposed findings. Are there any amendments to the proposed findings? I have one amendment that I have circulated. I have one minor change to it, so I'll recognize myself for a motion. My motion is to amend finding 12 so that it reads, the Southwest Airlines flight crew members should have informed the controller of their plan to perform an engine run-up period. It would strike if they had known that the controller could not see the airplane from the tower. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Brown. I will just say the only reason I originally had, although not required to do so, but it pretty much already states that in finding 11 anyways, but that communication should have happened, especially because there was low visibility, but we do not have any evidence either way that they had known the controller could not see the airplane or didn't know or had known. That was not reflected in the interviews, but in several parts of the this draft report, we recognize that communication should have happened, so I'm just making it clear here. Is there discussion on the amendment? Oh, good. Okay, thank you. And no amendments to the amendment, no? And staff, do you have a position on the amendment?
Staff concurs.
Thank you very much. All right. Council will call the roll.
Board, if in favor, say aye. If opposed, say nay. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Inman.
Aye.
Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Chair, the vote tally is 5 in favor, 0 in opposition of adopting the amendment to finding number 12.
All right. Do we have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Oh, sorry. So moved.
Got ahead of you, sorry.
Is there, oh, you already did it? Wow, you just were right on it. Member Inman has moved to adopt the findings as amended.
Second.
Thank you. Second by Member Graham. And council call the roll. Tally the vote.
Board, if in favor, say aye. If opposed, say nay. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Inman.
Aye.
Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Chair, the vote tally is 5 in favor, 0 in opposition of adopting the findings as amended.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mr. Curtis, you can read the proposed probable cause.
Staff proposes the following probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of this incident was the local controller's incorrect assumption that the Southwest Airlines SWA airplane would depart from the runway before the Federal Express airplane arrived on the same runway, which resulted in a loss of separation between both airplanes. Contributing to the controller's incorrect assumption were his expectation bias regarding the SWA airplane's departure, his lack of situational awareness regarding the SWA airplane's position when the flight crew requested takeoff clearance, and the air traffic control tower's lack of training before the incident on low visibility operations. Contributing to the incident was the SWA flight crew member's failure to account for the traffic that was on short final approach and to notify the controller that they would need additional time on the runway before the takeoff roll. Also contributing to the incident was the Federal Aviation Administration's failure to require surface detection equipment at Austin-Bergstrom International Airport and direct alerting for flight crews. Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any amendments to the probable cause? Motion to adopt the probable cause.
So moved.
Moved by Member Graham, seconded by Member Brown. Council will call the roll. Tally the vote.
Board, if in favor, say aye. If opposed, say nay. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Inman.
Aye.
Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Chair, the vote tally is 5 in favor of adopting the probable cause.
Great, thank you. Mr. Curtis, will you please read the proposed safety recommendations?
Certainly, Chair. As a result of this investigation, staff proposes the following 7 new safety recommendations to the Federal Aviation Administration. Number 1, for airports that are certificated under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 139, and are currently not equipped with airport surface detection equipment, Model X, or airport surface surveillance capability, implement surface detection equipment that tracks the movement of arriving and departing aircraft, determines the proximity between those aircraft, and provides air traffic controllers with visual and oral cues of surface movements to aid in their decision-making processes. Number 2, require air traffic controllers to advise pilots through direct communication and automatic terminal information system broadcasts when visual contact with aircraft operating on taxiways and runways cannot be established or maintained, and instruct pilots to provide accurate position reports to aid the controller in determining an aircraft's location in such conditions. Number 3, brief all air traffic controllers about the circumstances of this incident, emphasizing the effect that certain conditions might have on a pilot's ability to begin a takeoff in a timely manner, including low visibility weather conditions, such as fog, ambient conditions, such as temperature, and surface conditions, such as ice, snow, and other precipitation, as noted in Order 7110.65, Air Traffic Control, paragraph 584, Departure and Arrival. Number 4, amend the Aeronautical Information Manual so that it instructs pilots to inform controllers before entering an active runway with the intent to depart when they need time on the runway for any reason before beginning the takeoff roll. Number 5, require all airports with a surface movement guidance and control system plan to ensure that their plans and the associated letters of agreement correspond with each other and the stakeholder duties and responsibilities described in Advisory Circular 120-57, Surface Movement Guidance and Control System. Number 6, direct training administrators at airports with a surface movement guidance and control system plan to require initial and annual refresher training for all stakeholders, including air traffic controllers and airport operations personnel, on the information in the airport's plan. Number 7, require training administrators at all operating air traffic control towers to conduct annual refresher training on low visibility operations. Staff further proposes reiterating the following 5 safety recommendations to the Federal Aviation Administration. Recommendation A-24-4, collaborate with aircraft and avionics manufacturers and software designers to develop the technology for a flight deck system that would provide visual and oral alerts to flight crews of traffic on a runway or taxiway and traffic on approach to land. Number 2, recommendation A-24-5, require that the technology developed in response to safety recommendation A-24-4 be installed in all newly certificated transport category airplanes. Number 3, recommendation A-24-6, require that existing transport category airplanes be retrofitted with the technology developed in response to safety recommendation A-24-4. Number 4, recommendation A-18-30, require all newly manufactured airplanes that must have a cockpit voice recorder, CVR, be fitted with a CVR capable of recording the last 25 hours of audio. Number 5, recommendation A-24-9, require retrofit of all cockpit voice recorders, CVR, on all airplanes required to carry both a CVR and a flight data recorder with a CVR capable of recording the last 25 hours of audio. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curtis. Are there any amendments to the recommendations as proposed? Hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the recommendations as proposed?
Moved.
Moved by Member Chapman. It's a tie, really, but Member Chapman. Second?
Second.
Second by Member Brown. Council will call the roll and tally the vote.
Board, if in favor, say aye. If opposed, nay. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Inman.
Aye.
Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Chair, the vote tally is 5 in favor, 0 in opposition of adopting the recommendations as presented.
Thank you. I have a motion to, I have a few amendments for consideration for the report, so we'll now move on the report. Are there any amendments to the report outside of mine? Nope. Okay, I have 3 amendments that I've circulated to staff and to members in advance. I will read those. One is on page 10, well, really X, Roman numeral 10, lines 10 through 17. The paragraph states, currently states, on the basis of his previous experience with Southwest Airlines departures at Austin, the controller expected that when a Southwest pilot said that an airplane was ready to depart, the airplane would already be at the runway 18 left, hold short line, skipping the paren. The controller stated that this expectation was communicated to the Southwest flight crew as well as the flight crews of airplanes that departed that morning before the incident flight. This same type of scenario was also stated on page 26, lines 4 through 12. And then on page 77, I have an amendment for line 11 to page 78, line 7. And I'm just going to do these on block. The controller also stated that during a post-incident interview that he and the operations supervisor had advised flight crews of departing airplanes of the expectation that the airplanes would be at the hold short line when the crews requested takeoff clearance. As a result, the local controller, and I'd add, stated that he fully expected that the airplanes would be at the hold short line when the flight crews made initial contact to request takeoff clearance. My amendment on that one comes at the end. It would say the ATC recording showed that the controller did not advise flight crews of the expectation that airplanes would be at the hold short line when the crews requested takeoff clearance. In addition, he, and then it picks up again, did not ask flight crews to verify their airplane's position, which would have been a prudent action given the low visibility conditions and the lack of surface detection technology in the tower. In the first 2 amendments, I'm just adding a line that states, however, ATC recordings provided no evidence supporting the controller's statement. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Member Brown. Thank you, Member Brown. Discussion. This is not to blame at all. We just did not have this evidence. And from my reading of the report, and I assume the public's reading, it was stated 3 different times in the report, and it looked like that was factual because there was no clarifying sentence. So I wanted to make sure that it was accurate how we have the evidence, and the evidence does not indicate that was provided. I checked in the recordings myself. Further discussion?
Just one, not really a discussion on that specifically, but it reminds me, the actual ATC recordings, I don't know that we've got a true transcript in the docket. Is that correct?
We have the ATC, we do not have ground control, no.
We
right?
don't have ground control, but there was local control.
There was local
I'm just
control
mentioning
recording.
it was not an intentional omission. Whenever we're talking about some of this, it was just because it was not great audio and some other things. So I just wanted to bring up, I don't have an issue with the amendments. I just wanted to, if someone's looking in the docket trying to read, usually those transcripts are in there. But in this case, one of them's not.
Yeah, but yes, that's true. This one, though, is referring to the local controller, and the local controller transcripts are in there. The ground control is not. However, the recording of ground control is in the docket.
Yep.
Further discussion?
No, ma'am.
No? All right, great. Council, tally the vote. Call the roll and tally the vote.
Board, if in favor, say aye. If opposed, say nay. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Inman.
Aye.
Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Chair, the vote tally is 5 in favor, 0 in opposition of amending the report language.
Great. Any other amendments to the report? Okay, we will move on to adopting the report as amended. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Moved by Member Chapman. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Member Inman. Council, please call the roll and tally the vote.
Board, if in favor, say aye. If opposed, say nay. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Inman.
Aye.
Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Chair, the vote tally is 5 in favor, 0 in opposition of adopting the report as presented.
Thank you. And when notation items are adopted at a board meeting, a board member must state his or her intention to file a concurring or dissenting statement immediately following the vote according to Board Order 4D. Does any member wish to reserve the right to file a concurring or dissenting statement? Member Graham. All right, Member Graham, you have 5 business days to submit a concurring or a dissenting statement. Members will have another 5 business days to join or note Member Graham's concurring or dissenting statement. Thank you very much. I am going to, before closing, recognize Member Chapman for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I have some brief comments, and I do want to offer a motion. Our board meetings are typically ill-suited for any sort of lighthearted matters or discussion, but the outcome, thankfully, in this case involved no harm to the occupants of the aircraft, nor was there any damage. Consequently, and before we close, I want to take a moment to recognize Linda McGonigal of my staff, who is celebrating her birthday today.
And she's thoroughly embarrassed now.
I can...
Yay! Do we get to sing?
No, I was a music major. I don't want to do any harm here. I can think of no more festive manner of celebrating than to spend several hours in an NTSB board meeting. During the break, I took the liberty of confidentially polling my colleagues on a resolution which I hope might be included in the record. I have the results of that confidential polling, and so I now share my resolution as follows. The National Transportation Safety Board, by a vote of 4-1, hereby wishes Linda McGonigal a very happy birthday.
Who is the one?
It's confidential. It's confidential.
Wonderful. Well, happy birthday, Linda. So our deliberations have now concluded. I want to thank my fellow board members and their staff for their preparation and participation in today's meeting. We discussed important topics that will benefit the final report and inform our safety recommendations. With that, I'd like to extend the board's thanks to Team NTSB, especially our colleagues in the Office of Aviation Safety, the Office of Research and Engineering, and the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications, and certainly the Office of General Counsel, for their work over the course of this investigation and in the development of an excellent report. We also express our appreciation to our colleagues in the Office of Human Capital and Training, the Office of Chief Information Officer, and the Digital Services Division for their vital support of this meeting. And along those lines, I will thank Safety Recommendations and Communications and the Office of Aviation Safety going forward, because I know your diligent work and advocacy to improve safety will carry out over the next couple of months and years. When acted upon, the recommendations we've issued today will save lives. Going forward, the NTSB looks forward to working with the FAA to implement our recommendations as well as others where we've issued recommendations. At the same time, NTSB will not stop working to create a safe transportation system where there is no longer a need for our recommendations. Thank you again. Thank you very much to the staff. So we stand adjourned.